Here.
Director Byers.
Here.
Director Faulkner.
Here.
Director Hudson.
Here.
Director Moeller.
Here.
Vice President Patroff. Here. And President Cuneo.
Here.
And now can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first thing on the agenda. Agenda 2. Please establish the form. First thing is the CTE update with Mr. Avery.
All right. Vice President Patroff, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan. My name is Kevin Anderton. I'm the Executive Director of Career and Technical Education and College and Career Readiness, and I will be providing an update on career and technical education programming in the district. Next slide. So I wanted to start off with what were our 2 strategic priorities for FY22. So this summer we spent a lot of time with our 2 building teams at North Tech and South Tech to really identify, as we're moving into a more traditional school year, refocusing on those items that were focus areas prior to the pandemic. Those 2 areas being student success and stakeholder engagement. Within student success, we were really circling the wagons around explicit instruction, focusing on those foundational best practices in the classroom, work-based learning opportunities that includes internships, clinical experiences, job shadowing, as well as credential attainment, specifically industry-recognized credentials, so those credentials that students need to go into the world of work. Then within stakeholder engagement, we were looking at all of our key stakeholders, so students, families, partner districts, industry, and staff, and making sure that we had feedback mechanisms for all of those different audiences. One thing that's a new piece for us is we've added a partner district advisory. So we now have a group that meets 3 times a year with 1 representative from each of our partner districts, where we're specifically talking about career and technical education, how we better align opportunities between what exists in the partner district and what we're offering in special school district to make sure that we're maximizing resources. We want to avoid duplication and really focus on maximizing opportunities for students countywide. As well as trying to overcome those hurdles when we think about things like scheduling, logistics, and all the things that might impact a student's ability to access our programming. Next slide. So now we're talking a little bit about the demographics of our 2 schools. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as a reminder, who can participate in the career and technical education programs at North and South Tech? Any student who lives in St. Louis County or attends a public St. Louis County school is eligible to attend. So North Tech, we're looking at 10th through 12th grade, South Tech, 11th and 12th graders. This includes homeschool students, this includes private school students, and parochial students. Fox and Windsor districts are eligible to participate in our programming at South Tech. Priority goes to St. Louis County residents, but if there's still space after we filled with St. Louis County students, then Fox and Windsor students are able to backfill in certain programs. And overall, for a student to do a program with us, they need to meet eligibility criteria. That means primarily that they're on track for on-time graduation. And that's really looking at those core graduation credits. So you have enough communication arts, enough science, enough math, because what they're going to do with us predominantly is going to be an elective opportunity. So they have to have that flexibility in their schedule to participate in our programs. On top of that, some of our programs have specific prerequisite requirements. For example, our health sciences program, student must have a C or better in their science courses because there's a college credit anatomy and physiology course that's a part of that coursework. Next slide. So let's talk about demographics. We first want to talk about St. Louis County as a whole. So that far right column is the 2020 census data. Next to that is the K-12 student population in St. Louis County. And it's important to note that our student population is much more diverse than what you see in the county as a whole. Our student population in St. Louis County is majority minority. Roughly 49% of the students are white, 35% African American, 5.5% Hispanic, 5.5% Asian, 5% multiracial, and then you have Indian Pacific Islander down there at the bottom. So I want you to think about that as you look at the data for North Tech and South Tech. Next slide. So these are our 2 schools, and you're going to see that you've got what's the demographic breakdown for the sending schools that we serve. next to what's our representation at that school. So North Tech on the left, 74% of the students in our sending schools are African American, and then at North Tech, about 75% of our students are African American. So we're pretty much in line with what you'd see based off the sending schools that we pull from. South Tech on the right-hand side, roughly 71% of the students in our sending schools identify as white, while our population at South Tech is about 65% white. So South Tech is slightly more diverse than what you would see in our sending schools. And so we think that this is a really important reason to look at the data through that lens, because it shows you really how well do we represent the communities that we serve. Down there at the bottom, you also see the percentage of students with IEPs, so students with disabilities. At North Tech, in our sending schools, about 16% of students have disabilities, and then at North Tech, it's 17.71%, so higher than our sending schools. South Tech, it's 13.9% in our sending schools, and almost 30% at South Tech. So that has been pretty consistent, that South Tech is typically in that 25 to 30% range for students with disabilities. North Tech is typically in that 17 to 20% range.
Why?
So a couple factors. So part of it,
Gotta be significant.
it is significant, yeah. So a couple pieces. One is if you circle back to our application trends, South Tech receives more applications from students with IEPs than North Tech does. And so that's something that we're looking at. One of those factors involved is transiency. So as students move, it becomes more, so students who are more mobile, it's harder for them to access our programming. When you're moving from high school to high school, you're not necessarily aware of all those opportunities, that we just might be missing that student. That when we came to talk to McClure North High School, they weren't there, and now they're at McClure North, but we missed them because they were at Normandy when we were at McClure North. And so it's trying to make sure we're reaching all of those students. It's actually one of our focus areas moving forward to making sure that we get that message across. The new CSIP has a focus on mobility, and we're thinking about that from the lens of the tech schools of how do we make sure our message gets to the highly mobile student population. Next slide. Demographics. So this is some exciting data here from gender. North Tech is majority female. It's the only career and technical education center in the state of the 57 that is majority female. South Tech is majority male, which is pretty in line with the rest of the CTE centers across the state. Slide. So some of that byproduct of North Tech being majority female, we're seeing a higher concentration of female students participating in what are called non-traditional career paths. So that would be female students participating in construction or welding. So at North Tech, nearly 15% of our female students are participating in a non-traditional pathway. At South Tech, it's also about 15% of our female population participating in a non-traditional pathway. 5 years ago, we were at about 10% of our females participating in a non-traditional pathway. So we're really excited to see the growth there. Some of it has been by focusing on really intentional efforts to bring in past graduates and mentors who are pursuing a non-traditional pathway to really help and mainstream that to students. You also have the percentages there for our males, which is around 9% of our males are participating in a non-traditional pathway. So be that early childhood education, health sciences, dental sciences, something along those lines. Next slide. Then we look at our enrollment. So this is our breakdown by sending school versus based off raw totals. So there at the top, we would have at North Tech 128 students from Hazelwood West, 116 from Rittner, Hazelwood Central 108, and you can see those are really our top 3 sending schools, and that's pretty consistent year over year. Those are also large high schools. Down there at the bottom, you'll see some of our smaller schools, Normandy, Jennings, and University City. If you go to the next slide, we want to look at that data from another lens. So that dark line you see there between McClure North and Jennings, that's 6.4%. So North Tech receives 6.4% of the students in our sending schools who are eligible to come. So 6.4% of 10, 11, and 12th graders in our sending schools are enrolled at North Tech. Everybody above that black line is above the average, and everybody below that line is below the average. And so you can see, while it looked like we had a very small number from Jennings, they're almost at the average as far as participation goes, as is Normandy. They're there at 5.5%, whereas Pattonville was above them, but we're only getting 2.3% from Pattonville. So we really want to look at the data from this lens of where is there opportunity to grow and increase participation. Next slide. Here's the breakdown for South Tech. This data, again, is pretty consistent year over year. Lindbergh, Oakville, and Melville are our top 3 senders, especially the Melville School District. It's Melville and Oakville combined. Then there's a pretty steep drop-off when you get to Parkway South, And then you can see down at the bottom some of our smaller schools, Hancock, Brentwood, and Clayton. Going to go to the next slide. We're again going to look at that data from a different lens. So of the percent eligible, so of juniors and seniors, you see Bayless High School there at the top, 15.5% of Bayless High School students who are juniors and seniors are participating in a program at South Tech. So that's a pretty high concentration of students from that high school. And as you'll see at the top, Bayless, Valley Park, Maplewood, Afton, Brentwood are all above that average line. It speaks to the fact that those students don't have as many elective opportunities available to them in their home high school. So if they're seeking to do something beyond traditional academics and fine arts, they really have to pursue those opportunities outside of their building, and so they're taking advantage of what we offer at South Tech. Just like the North Tech data, that line there in the middle, 5.7% of students in our high schools that are eligible to attend are enrolled at South Tech. And we want to look at those schools that are below the average line to how do we bring those numbers up, especially in comparison when you look at like in district, where Rockwood Summit, we get 4.7%, but Eureka's over 5. How do we get Rockwood Summit's data a little bit closer to Eureka? Is what we use this type of data for. Next slide. So then the next segment of data we're going to look at is placement. So where do our students go after they complete our programs? And so we do graduate follow-up 180 days after graduation, so roughly 6 months after graduation. This data here is for the class of 2021, so our most recent graduating class. And you're going to see some pretty strong parallels between the two schools. Both schools, more than 50% of our students leave us and move on to college or some form of post-secondary training. Employment, about a third of our students move directly into the workforce. That number has escalated pretty rapidly in the last year, especially as more and more companies are searching for talent and are willing to bring on younger individuals into the workforce, where before they wanted those students to go to college first before hiring. South Tech has a higher concentration of students going into the military than North. That means that they're not working, they're not in the military, and they're not in college. And then unknown, those are the students that we called every number, looked down every rock, reached out to everyone, and we just couldn't find those students. And you will see the North Tech number is slightly higher than the South Tech number for unknown, and we attribute that again to the mobility component, that as students move, as phone numbers change, because we're following up 6 months after graduation, we aren't able necessarily to track down those students. Next slide. So then we look at that same placement data from an equity lens. We want to look at it through a couple different areas. So we look at it through the lens of gender. And so you can see through gender that our female students have a much higher likelihood of moving on to college or post-secondary training than our male students. And while on average, nationally, that's pretty much the trend, that females are more likely to pursue post-secondary education than males, the difference that we see at North and South Tech versus high school students in general, across the board, it's a bigger divide. Nationally, it's about a 12% difference, and you can see we're kind of right there with North Tech. South Tech, the divide is even steeper. Our male students are more likely to enter the workforce. At South Tech, you can see our males are much more likely to go into the military. Next slide. So we also looked at this data through the lens of race. We excluded any cohort that had less than 10 students. So that's why you don't see a Pacific Islander column, why North Tech doesn't have an Asian column, because we just didn't have enough students to have generalizable data. So you can see the difference between our African American students and our white students. Our African American students are much more likely to go to college or post-secondary training than our white students. Both schools, our white students are more likely to go into the world of work. At South Tech, you can see it's an even split between our white students and our African American students when it comes to the military. Next slide. And then we also want to look at that data through the lens of disability status. So our students with disabilities, what are the outcomes for those students? And you can see between North Tech and South Tech, it's an apples for apples match. Both schools, 44.7% are going on to college and training, and 44.7% are employed. So we were really surprised the data was that close between the two schools. South Tech does have a higher concentration going into the military. Did you have a question, Dr. Asner?
I'd be interested to see this data compared to, for example, data from our partner districts for students with disability status, and you know their placement is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can at least provide you in a Friday packet the SPP data that gives you kind of the county-wide. So you can compare that county-wide students with disability placement data to what we have here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide. So programs and updates, some updates on our programming. So you do have the handout for me, and I'm going to reference that here in a little bit, that has the list of all of our current programs that we offer. As a reminder, for a program at North and South Tech, there's really 5 key components. One, there has to be a DESE-approved CTE course code that exists for us to offer a course. So if a class is listed as fine arts, that's outside of our scope. If a class is listed as math, that's outside of our scope. It's got to be something that's identified by the state as career and technical education. Second key ingredient is we have to have student interest, and we're talking about sustained student interest. So not just, well, there's a peak, but we don't really have years of data to show that there's students who want this program. We also want programs to not compete with something else that we're already offering. So what we don't want to do is to add a program that will then decrease enrollment somewhere else. Or is going to compete directly with a partner district program. Because if there's a partner district overlap, students might not be willing to leave that home high school to come to the program that we offer at North and South Tech. We want to be a good partner with our partner districts. Third piece is workforce need, and we're looking at as both long-term and short-term at the local level is their need for this industry area. Fourth piece is there a post-secondary pathway. So when a student completes our program, what is their next step? Is there a college pathway? Is there opportunity locally for them to go into the workforce? Is there an apprenticeship opportunity? All of those pieces come into play. And then the fifth piece, and this sometimes can be the deal breaker for us when it comes to programming, is logistics. First and foremost, do we have a space available to house the program? Not all of our programs can be put just in a traditional classroom. When you look at the square footage, you look at safety requirements. Take a program like diesel technology, for example. I can't put that in the second floor of a building. Diesel technology has to be on a main level. It has to have a large bay door. I have to be able to fit a semi-truck inside of that space. And so logistics can become a major hurdle for us when we're looking to bring new programming. Second piece is we have to be able to hire a teacher from industry. And this has become more and more challenging as industry continues to pay more and more for positions. Currently, we're seeking to hire health sciences instructors at North Technical High School, and we're competing against the world of healthcare that's paying large sign-on bonuses, is offering unprecedented flexibility, and we're trying to compete with that with our salary schedule. So in some cases, our biggest barrier to expansion is our ability to find faculty. And then the third piece is we have to be able to procure all of the equipment that's required for that program. So can we fit all that equipment that's necessary into the space? And especially now, with supply chain limitations, can we get everything we need when we want to launch a class? And so supply chain has been a new wrinkle in the equation that wasn't as much of a challenge in the past. Next slide. So with that being said, we do have some upcoming new programs. So at North Tech, we've got 3 new programs on the horizon. These are all going to launch in August of 2023. We have Multimedia Production, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about here in a moment. We have Baking and Pastry Arts, which is going to become a pathway option within our culinary program. So students will come into culinary arts as a junior, and in their senior year, they'll have the option to move on to either a baking and pastry path, or do they want to continue on a traditional culinary path. There's strong interest that we're receiving from students on the way in the door that they have an interest in baking and pastry, cakes, cupcakes, etc. TV definitely plays into that as well. And then there's a really strong program at St. Louis Community College that they can go into for baking and pastry, or they can continue in the culinary path. And then Dental Sciences is a program that currently exists at South Tech, and it's got strong interest at North. We've done a lot of surveys over the last several years. It's tested really well. We're seeking to bring that to North Tech. As I mentioned, supply chain, that's the reason why it's not coming in 2022. The equipment, we just were not able to get it here and on time and have that lab set up, so we needed some additional time to get the lab underway, and so that's why it's going to be an August of 2023 launch. South Tech is going to be adding baking and pastry as well as an option within their culinary arts program. Next slide. And so Multimedia Production, so this is one of those programs that we're adding. So we've worked through the curriculum development process. So Dr. Bolton was very helpful in that with making sure we align everything to DESE standards, make sure that we have a DESE-approved course code, so it's coded as multimedia. And then we adapted our feedback and the structure of the program based off what we heard from our industry partners. And so we worked with Bruton Strobe Studios, which is a local company based on over in Locust in the city of St. Louis. They do a lot of commercial advertising, they do documentaries, short films, and they really helped us with the structure and the units that we were covering within this lesson. Because we wanted to tailor the course around what's the need in the local industry. Because our students are here in St. Louis, our charge is to serve the St. Louis community, making sure that we're building a program around what are those local needs and where is the demand. And so that's how you have the unit breakdown there on the right. That's what you would see in our curriculum program, the BYOC program. we wanted to emphasize multiple post-secondary pathways. So as I mentioned before, you want to have multiple avenues. A student has opportunities at the associate's degree level in this field. There's opportunities at the bachelor's degree level. There's also opportunities they go directly into the workforce. And so those are those pieces that we're looking for as we're bringing new programs. Are there multiple pathways and multiple avenues for the student? Next slide. I'm going to touch briefly on our recruitment process and program promotion efforts. So if you go to the next slide. So our admissions process, simplest terms, students apply, admissions representatives confirm a student meets the eligibility requirements, they live in St. Louis County, they're in the right grade level, they're on track for graduation. Then from there, an application is scored on a rubric where you look at grades, attendance, discipline, and then from there we have admissions rounds that are held throughout the year to accept students. If a program is full, then students are placed on a wait list. If a student remains on a wait list, and we reach the start of the next school year, they can apply again for the next year for a different program if that's something they so choose. Or if they're on a wait list, they also have the option to choose to apply for a different program. And we're going to look at some of that data here in a little bit when we talk about the wait list. Next slide. So program promotion efforts. So we have admissions representatives who visit each of our partner district high schools. They come into classrooms, they do presentations, they come into cafeterias and do lunchroom visits. They meet with guidance counselors, they meet with students on an individual level, small group level. It really varies from building to building on what that engagement looks like and what opportunities we have to promote our programs. We also do open houses. So we do open houses typically the first semester of the school year where we open up the doors to the community. We do student tours, so that's group, school-wide, individual. We do a wide variety of presentations and a wide variety of settings at grade levels as low as elementary all the way up to sophomores in high school. We do 8th grade visits in a more traditional year, which we're hoping to get back to next year, where we bring in 8th graders from our partner district middle schools to give them the opportunity to do some hands-on experiences in our classrooms. And then we do a lot of other activities that kind of fall under the program promotion umbrella. We had the apprenticeship showcases that Sally Defani in the communications department here helped us get off the ground, where we had several hundred families attend both events at North Tech and South Tech, where we were really promoting careers that have apprenticeships as part of the pathway. But the byproduct by us hosting it was it got students and families into our building who might not otherwise come into our schools, and then talked about how if you're interested in a pathway to be a cement mason, your most logical next step is to come to South Tech or North Tech and be part of our construction programming. We also have our student ambassadors that serve as our liaisons in our partner districts, and they promote the programs when potential students come and visit. And then we do some digital outreach and social media campaigns. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of our applications for August of 2022 versus what our capacity is. So you can see there at the top, auto collision repair. So for North Tech, we can have 16 students enroll in that course. So far, we have received 26 applications for that program. Our most popular programs by number of applicants, you can see, are construction innovations, cosmetology, and then the sophomore exploration program, as well as health sciences. So those are all strong interest programs. Even though some of those programs might develop a very high wait list, as you work through the recruitment cycle, we have students who, even though they apply, that doesn't mean they're going to accept it. When we send them that letter in the mail that says, congratulations, you have a spot. Just like colleges and universities, students are weighing a lot of different options. And sometimes if we compete with an elective class at the home high school, or we compete with marching band or an after-school activity, the student might choose to stay at their home high school instead of accessing the program that we offer. We also have students, if they choose to drop late in the cycle and we start calling as the school year starts, we add students up to the 10th day of school. When you call a student in August to offer them a spot in a program, many students are already set with their schedule, they're pretty happy with it, and they don't want to disrupt it. And so those students turn us down. And so sometimes you might have 50 students on a wait list, and we go through the whole wait list if there's a drop close to the start of the school year. Next slide. So this is the same data for South Tech. So again, you've got the capacities there on the right-hand side in yellow. Most popular programs at South Tech, construction innovations, cosmetology, health sciences. You're probably seeing a pattern between the two schools. Culinary arts also has a high number of applications as well. And then one difference between the two schools, automotive technology at South Tech is an extremely popular program. We have over 100 applications for that program as well. And so if you look at the handout that I provided you guys, it gives you the breakdown of our programs. It also kind of puts in perspective where our programming compares to other career and technical education centers. So that map of Missouri, the little green numbers on it, show you the 57 area career centers that exist in the state. In comparison to the rest of the state, most of the career centers offer somewhere in the range of 15 or fewer programs. There's only a handful that offer more than that. And we are the number 1 and number 2 in the state as far as number of programs go. So South Tech and North Tech both offer 25 or more programs, where the next closest to us is Ozark Technical College and Rolla Technical Institute that both offer 19 programs. So we offer a very diverse set of options. Some of it comes from the fact that we're in a metropolitan area, so our needs are much more diverse than what you'd see in a rural setting. The other piece is, again, that relationship that we've built with the partner districts, or how do we build unique opportunities for students where it's something that doesn't already exist at their home high school? How do we maximize those opportunities and maximize those pathways? So when we think about our programming, that's the lens that we look through. Next slide. Any questions?
I have a couple. I'm going to start with going back to our applications and capacity at North Tech. As you say, I've listed all the ones that seem to be highest, but my question regarding cosmetology and then seniors. When we offer the cosmetology courses, I'm assuming we're offering courses that then give certifications that are necessary. Is that correct?
So, clarifier with that. So the cosmetology program, the 2-year program, is going to result in a student earning their state board certification. If they have the 90% or above attendance as a part of the program, they meet all the cut scores, and they pass the 2 tests from the state, yes, they'd be able to get their state board certification. If a student does our 1-year senior option, which is something that exists at North Tech, that's more exploratory in nature. We're going to introduce them into the field of cosmetology, but they don't have enough hours to leave with their state license. They would need to then move on to another school of beauty or cosmetology school to finish up their remaining hours.
Okay. And so when I look at the applications versus cosmetology, and I'm assuming that means the ones that are interested in being certified, is it such that that number difference means that maybe we need to expand that program?
So as I mentioned, that's one data point. Student interest is absolutely one of the data points that we look at. And so space is another component. Being able to hire an instructor is another component. And then looking at that workforce need and the workforce demand. And when we're looking at adding programs, it's always a trade-off. If we expand cosmetology, then that's another program that we might not be able to bring. And so at this point for North Tech, we were able to add baking and pastry and not have to add any additional lab space, which is why we were able to add that program. Multimedia is a program that can fit on a second floor. It can fit in a lot of other spaces. And then dental sciences is a program that's tested extremely well, and it's not a program that's really going to compete with anything that we're already offering at North Tech. So we currently have 2 sections of cosmetology at North Tech and 2 sections of cosmetology at South Tech. We have not looked at this point into adding a 3rd section of that program. It's one of those that even though it does have a big wait list, as you get closer to the school year, we do move through that wait list at a pretty good clip, especially as you get closer to August. And so at this point, we have not looked at adding another section of that program. It seems like a program that doesn't require a lot of it's not as complicated as adding diesel technology. However, it does have a lot of electrical need. When you have 16 students in a class who are using hair dryers and hair straighteners and all that at the same time, there's a lot of electrical need that's required for that program. And so there's only certain settings and in our buildings, certain hallways that would be able to accommodate the amount of electrical need that that program has. So that is something that we weigh. Is it a program that we look at? It is. At North Tech, though, we're also looking at potentially down the line bringing barbering. That's a unique program that we don't currently offer. So instead of adding another section of cosmetology, we're also weighing, does it make more sense to add a barbering program that would reach a different demographic of student than what we're currently reaching with cosmetology, but might also still be a bridge where there's some students who are applying for cosmetology because barbering doesn't exist. And so that's a piece that we're weighing. So when we talk about what's the workforce need, we want to look at all those workforce pathways, and is there something else within that pathway that might make more sense than adding just another section of something we're already doing.
Okay, well, my concern about that is, as you said, it's a 2-year course. And if a young lady applies in her junior year, she's planning on getting her senior and junior year so that she can get certified. Therefore, when she graduates, she's already in position to be able to now turn her experiences into job or career, okay? Whereas that if in fact she's on the waiting list for a year, she's still only going to get 1 year at that point, and therefore she does not have, her ambition may be to actually become a beautician. But she's now incapable of doing that because she's been on a waiting list. So when I asked about expanding the program, I was wanting to know whether or not our person in charge of the program, Claudia, is she being overbearing with work in reference to there needs to be maybe another assistant that she has to try to help her through the workload.
So we have 2 cosmetology instructors at North Tech, Ms. Boyd and Ms. Burns, and both of their classes are full morning and afternoon. So it also comes down to capacity. So we only have so many workstations in the room, and so every student needs to have a booth.
Right.
So there's only so many booths, and there's only so much room to put booths. And so those are some of those logistical challenges that we have within our program. And so that's kind of where we're at with cosmetology. It's a popular program, but it is full. The other piece is if a student comes to that 1-year program in the afternoon, there is still some opportunity for them. They could move on to a school of beauty and get credit for what they've done. But they also, we have students who choose to go the hair braiding route. We've had students who choose to become nail technicians. We've had students who chose to go into makeup. And so it's a lot of different avenues within that one career pathway. And so that's the reason we added that 1-year option, is if we have drops during the junior year, we want to backfill it with some seniors to give them opportunity and exposure, knowing that there are multiple pathways within the industry.
What kind of competition do we have in reference to that training?
As far as cosmetology programs, at the high school level, we're it for the region. But when you talk about post-secondary, I mean, there are a wide variety of schools of beauty and colleges of beauty that are around. And we do have some students who choose to move on to that, especially if they don't pass the state board certification. Just because they do our program, it's not a guarantee that they're going to pass the state board certification, or they're going to meet the eligibility requirements for the state board certification. If their attendance is below 90%, we can't send them to test. And so some of those students with attendance issues wind up moving on to a school of beauty to do that as their next step.
And well, to me, that would be concern, at least a knowledgeable concern, because I'm asking that to know how many different outlets do these kids have in their community-based experiences. You know, I'm assuming that most of the kids that we have, and I also have a question about the differences in the 3 different schools, even in one district, but that might be a question I have to ask the school district itself, I'm not sure. But if we don't have, if we're the only real opportunity for a young lady to get certification, and she's made that choice in her junior year, by the time she gets to be a junior, chances are she's exposed to whatever the financial reward that brings. She's already been exposed to that. And so I know that we can't assist everybody based upon the criteria that you've given me. But I also wonder how many that we don't assist that find themselves falling through the gaps at a time when their motivation is very high to be a part of something that they believe themselves have capabilities of doing, or a deep-seated desire to want to accomplish. So that's a concern that I have in reference to cosmetology in particular. And I'm sure that if we do add borrowing, we will find similar, same kind of interest, particularly because it's North County and the residents are majority African American. Those two are part of our heritage, not to say that everybody doesn't get their hair done, doesn't get their faces made, but when you start talking about those things in the African American community, they've always been very prevalent. And so to that point, I am concerned in reference to the number of young ladies applying at junior who can't get in, and therefore they feel timing-wise, they may not be going to college. This was their real intent, become a beautician. And as you say, you've got makeup, you've got all kinds of different things that are part of that industry. And creation of small companies, in reference to beauty shops and barber shops, has been such a deep-seated part of the African-American community. And it's always been one to where there has been revenue availability as far as clientele. And I would not like to see us be in a position to where we underestimated and did not necessarily, particularly if there's no other option but us to be able to gain that kind of credibility in the field. I would like for us not to be able to underestimate that.
So again, this is data that we monitor on an annual basis, and it's things that we take into account as we ebb and flow with programming. And there's programs that we used to offer. We used to offer broadcast captioning and court reporting, but as software continued to improve, that's a program we phased out. And so as we have programs ebb and flow and we have space become available, that's when we do the deep dive into the data and figure out what makes the most sense for us at that time and what's the most logical next step. And what can meet all those boxes, that there is the industry need, that we can hire an instructor, that we can outfit a classroom, that we have the proper space available, all those pieces and components. So I can't say to you right now, one way or the other, are we going to add another section of cosmetology to North Tech in the near future, but what I can say is we're going to use the same process that we use for adding any program when we look at this data, just like at South Tech where we added an additional section of automotive technology a few years ago. It's because we had that long-term data to back it up. Our challenge, especially this past year, was our recruitment data for August of 2021 looked nothing like any other recruitment data we had because we'd never recruited in a pandemic before. So this is really, we're getting back to normal as far as what our recruitment cycle, recruitment process, and data looks like. And so this is our first year of more traditional recruitment cycle where we can look at that data, but I want to see that long-term sustained trend versus something being a blip on the radar of that attention might go to something else. And so, because we've had it in the past, we had years where law enforcement had really high interest for a year or two, and then it kind of waned back down. We had where web and computer interest went way up, and then it kind of waned back down. And so we want to be those good stewards of taxpayer dollars and making sure that we're doing what's best for the students in our community.
Do you think that the possibility, I was looking here to see, is cosmetology one of those courses that we can offer at a earlier age, maybe at starting at 10th grade?
So it's one that
they have 2 years?
Yeah, good question. So we actually have limits by the State Board of Cosmetology. So there's a Missouri statute that specifically dictates that you cannot enroll a student in a high school-based cosmetology program until the junior year. And so they have to have a certain number of high school credits before they can enroll in a high school-based program. And so there's no way for a student to have enough high school credits as a sophomore to meet that criteria. So then the challenge is we have to prove that to get their student license. If they don't have a student license, then they're not able to work on clients, they're not able to work in the lab, and none of the hours count. And so they have to be a junior to be able to obtain that student license. And that's one of those challenges. We have to juggle regulatory systems that are designed for adult programs that we're doing in the high school setting with 15, 16, 17-year-olds and trying to reconcile those two pieces. And so it's the same thing with health sciences. Department of Health and Senior Services won't allow us to register a student for the CNA coursework until they're 16 years old. So even if we wanted to start a younger program, there's limitations by those outside regulatory agencies and what the state will permit us to do. And not just DESE, but also those state regulatory bodies that oversee things like cosmetology, CNA certification, et cetera.
Well, I know, and I mentioned it to Dr. Cuneo in one of the figures where you talked about the unknowns. My question was, I wonder if they're in jail. By that time, with having whatever particular challenges that a kid may have at that particular stage of life, then some of the unknowns that we have in reference to turnout of students could be individuals who, for no reason ours, but nevertheless they're experiencing. I was looking at military as well.
Yeah, and there is a different placement code. I didn't put it on here because we didn't have enough students for it really to be much of a cohort. So there's not available would mean that a student is either deceased or incarcerated. And so we did have overall between the two schools, 3 students that fell under that not available category. So of the students that we were able to verify that they fell into that category, but those were pretty much an outlier. We don't have many students that fall under that not available category.
And when I was looking at the 3 schools in the Hazelwood district, it was surprising to see Central and West with the amount of being above the line and East, and East being way below. And I think about our community. There's always been, because East is larger African-American population, Black population in the whole district. And I look at history within the Hazelwood School District. And you would think that being possibly one in the lower income, Central is usually a more middle and upper income. West is usually more of the white portion of the district. When you start looking at the breakdowns in the high schools, you have like 87% Caucasian, opposed to 98% on the east side being African American. So you would think that in those financial conditions that there would be a greater interest to be able to have these kinds of accesses for career pathing than it would be for middle and upper income kids. But it's quite the opposite. They seem to.
The other piece is our best advertisement, honestly, is word of mouth. It is our students having positive experiences, and so as you get more students from ascending school, we get more students the year over year. Like Rittner, if you looked at this data 6 years ago, Rittner was near the bottom of our list. It was hanging out with Pattonville. But we had a change in philosophy, some change in leadership at Rittner High School. We got some buy-in from the social studies department of all places, who really believes in career and technical education and the connection that it has to the education about labor and those pieces. And now Rittner is one of our strongest sending schools. And it's those positive experiences. It's also continuity in a guidance department of do the people who are doing schedules and work with students through that process, are they well informed on what opportunities exist outside of their building? And so a lot of our recruitment process is all relationships with students, relationships with partner district staff, and that's where, especially this data, this is the same data that I'm taking to our partner district advisory, because I want them to look in the mirror and look at their data and see, where do you see opportunities? Where can we grow? Where, especially when you look at it from a programmatic level, that we know you don't have anything in your district like this, you don't have students taking advantage of this opportunity, how do we bridge that?
Right.
And that's really the learning that we're trying to bring.
Line as well.
Yep. There's opportunity for growth, is what that says to me.
Kevin, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I think we should be clamoring from the rooftop that we're doing this. I think this is just phenomenal stuff, honestly. Top to bottom, start to finish, all of it, all the opportunities that we are generating for kids with specialized training. I have a little bias. I am familiar with some students who are in North Tech, and they say the same thing. They said we should be broadcasting this. There's a lot of people who don't know about this yet. So, and just the nature of the flux that our economy is in right now, and the number of businesses that are clamoring for people, for employees, for applicants. Going forward, I'm curious, I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but what would be on your wish list from us as a board to scale this up?
So we're taking a good hard look at facilities. So the challenge is we're trying to teach programs in 2022 in buildings that were built in the 1960s. And so your capacity in a building built in the 1960s, when you think about things like electrical infrastructure, they didn't expect there to be any computers, let alone hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of computers in our settings, and the type of equipment that we're bringing in. And so we're taking a good hard look, working with our facilities department, working with Dr. Hogg to take a longer range view of how do we align programs, locate programs, and line up for facilities for that room to grow. There's going to be a cost associated with that. You're going to see some capital expenses that are coming from us in that area. The other piece is equipment. Now, we can't afford to be at the bleeding edge of technology, but we do want to be at the cutting edge, where we know that when students leave us, they need to be training on equipment that's comparable to what they're going to see in industry. So when you look at our budget requests between North Tech and South Tech, we do have about $350,000 in capital expenses that are in those two buildings. But those capital expenses are all tied to equipment that without it, students are not going to be exposed to what they see in the world of work. And our costs, unfortunately, because of the supply chain, continue to go up and up as the cost of steel increases, as the challenge of getting microprocessors increases, the cost on that equipment continues to climb. But it's the things that we have to have in the classroom, because if the student is not training on the right type of alignment rack and auto tech, and then they go out in the industry, they're going to be lost on the type of equipment they're trying to train on. It's not something where we continue to carry over things from the 90s and 80s and think that's going to be sufficient to what students are going to see in the world of work.
I had a question to request. I know that when we look at these, again, applications versus capacity, some programs were left off, and I was curious if we have that data, and if so, could it be provided for us on our Friday?
We absolutely can. The programs that you might not see on there, especially in the construction grouping, construction innovations is where students apply the junior year, and then senior year, they pick an area of specialization. So you won't see data for floor laying or electrical trades because they don't have the option to apply for that. We used to do that where it was direct entry, and what we found was a student would get into a program like electrical trades, become overwhelmed by the math, and then drop. But they might be a really good student in construction trades, or they might be a really good floor layer, and they didn't even know because they never got to get any exposure to it, because they gravitated either to a salary or what they were familiar with. So we reworked the construction program so during the junior year, students are going to try out 4 different areas within the field of construction to get that more broad exposure. Because in a lot of cases, students aren't aware of HVAC as a career pathway. Students aren't aware of floor laying. They're not aware of what masonry is. They know carpenter and electrician, and that's about the end. And so we want to make sure that students are making an informed decision, and so we kind of restructured it so that way students are getting that exploration, but at the same time, they're all crossover skills. If they're going to spend some time in welding, well, carpenters weld too. And so making sure that these are transferable skills, and they're going to give them more opportunities for employment. Yeah, but I can give you what our current enrollment is in those programs. I can't give you application data for those programs.
I think, for example, I didn't see information on welding and North Tech, for example.
So welding at North Tech does come in during the Construction Innovations program.
Camera alert?
Okay. Oh, just me. I have a question on SSD. OTech does not have a large footprint when it comes to what's on SSD. What do you think of OTech? What can we do to make that larger? Can we do that through, let's say, our web page? Can we do what?
I would say
our program is excellent. It's probably better than anywhere else in the state.
I would say that, yes. When you look at our outcomes, when you look at our data, when you look at, so I gave you our graduate data. We account for almost 7% of the concentrators in career and technical education in the state. I believe next year, as our enrollment gets back to a more normal world, we're going to account for about 8 to 9% of career and technical education students. Yeah.
How do we get decent publicity?
Yeah. The communications department has been really great to work with. Chantel Chandler specifically has been working with, especially at the local publication level, things like West News Magazine, the Call newspapers, the community news, those publications that people see in their community, the thing that might show up on your doorstep, trying to make sure that we're getting the word out to people through multiple avenues. We are also trying to, like through events like the Apprenticeship showcase what we do and expose it to people who might not be looking for information about North Tech and South Tech, but they're going to stumble into it because they're looking up, because this is going to wind up in the Metro section talking about apprenticeships. Oh, by the way, we're the piece of that puzzle. There was a big write-up in the Metro section recently about the demand in healthcare for CNAs. Well, that article, the first person quoted was our health sciences teacher at South Tech, Lou Woods, who goes to Del Mar Gardens with our students every week, and they're clamoring for more students like what we have to fill those future needs. And so it's how do we get ourselves to audiences who aren't necessarily looking for information about us, but have them stumble into us and want to learn more.
TV, TikTok.
Social media is one that we've worked through a variety of angles. But yeah, as adults, we are slightly behind students. It's a moving world.
Hey, Kevin, can you talk a little bit about what you've been working with in terms of the partner district schools and how it's a little bit more successful when they incorporate it into their offerings?
So the other piece is we're trying to mainstream what we do. And so we want to make sure that where students are going to look for information about elective opportunities that were there. So take Afton High School, for example. So Afton's worked really collaboratively with us, where when you look at their course guide, the courses that are offered at South Tech look like they're Afton courses, but all it says under the location is at South Tech. So the students can see the description, the credits, everything about it. It looks like Afton offers Auto Tech 1 and Auto Tech 2. They do not. It's at South Tech, but it's putting it in the place where the student is going to look. Where a lot of our districts before, in their course guides, they give us our own dedicated page to talk about North Tech and South Tech, and that's not what we're looking for. Those are the students who are seeking us out. We want to get to the students who don't even know that the opportunities that we have are something they want to take advantage of. And so we're working with each of our partner districts to try and do that, to better infuse our opportunities to the places where students and families are already looking, especially those students who know that they might have an interest or an acumen for a specific area. We want to make sure that it's somewhere where they're going to find it. And so those partner district meetings where we're working through the career and technical education pathways are paying serious dividends. Part of that's attributing to why we have the numbers that we do for August of 2022 is because we're reaching students in a lot different ways than we were in the past.
The students doing the production for those pieces themselves, using production knowledge, allows them to create the advertised pieces.
In August of 2023, we'll get right on that.
A couple questions, a few questions, no quite. So if you can, in the Friday packet, show of those who are getting hired, division are they under? Are they getting hired in carpentry?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we can give you the break. So there's a couple ways that I can give you that data. So one is what they're doing related to what they study with us. So I can give you that breakdown, but then I can also give you the employer breakdown of where students are going. And so we can give it to you through a couple lenses.
That'd be great.
The final question I have in reference to training individuals for skills themselves. Being that so many, and again, I'm thinking in terms of our county community, being that most that I have encountered are individuals and not members of the union. So therefore, their particular abilities to use the skill is somewhat different. Are we also training in reference to having the skill and being able to now be more entrepreneurial with having the skill? Because some kids may have the skill, but they don't know how to start their own businesses within that skill set. Are we adding that to our training?
So our programs all have a work and career readiness component to it. And I will speak to the fact that our instructors are very good about customizing what they're instructing based upon the students in the room and the pathways that they're pursuing. Because every year is a different group of students with different aspirations and different career goals, and we want to customize what we're doing to that to the extent that we can. When you talk about entrepreneurship, I mean, it's something that we do expose students to and talk about. Every one of our pathways, there's the option to be your own business owner. There is. Every pathway that we have, that's an option. At the same time, we know when we're working with young adults, when we're working with 17, 18, 19-year-olds, most likely their most logical next step is either post-secondary education or going to work for someone else. And so that's what we're really setting them up for. That trajectory is the most likely next step. We have really good relationships with the labor unions in St. Louis County, and we work really closely with the general contractors and subcontractors that are interested in hiring young people. Not every company is open to young people, but we are focusing on those companies that are. Companies like Ameren, companies like Spire, companies like Clayco, where not only is it just lip service, they've actually dedicated people, talent, and resources for mentoring. And when you have that employee who slips up on the job, instead of firing them, how do you support them through it? Because when you bring in an 18-year-old, they have the maturity of an 18-year-old, and they are going to make mistakes that a 25, 28, 40-year-old probably isn't going to make. And you have two options when you come to that road. You can either let them go or you can support them through it and make it a learning opportunity. And so we focus on those companies that have the same mission that we do. We look for that mission alignment. So we're not just sending students out into the world. Our instructors are very selective of this is a good opportunity for our kids, and we want to connect you to that employer versus some other employer that doesn't have that same mindset. And that's really where we focus when we have those students who are planning to go into the workforce.
Well, my final statement, I guess, in that, and we'll move on, is I can appreciate that, but Ameren and all those companies have limitations. If there are 20 kids, Ameren says, okay, I can take 10 of them. The other 10 are left out. Fire says I can take 5 of them. And it's not a high turnover when you get to those jobs. So each year, if we were turning out 20 kids a year, just hypothetical figures, then realistically, how many of those kids are not going to go to Ameren because Ameren has already filled their needs in reference to those particular hires? Fire has filled their needs. So that's the reason I was asking about having the opportunity to tell a kid, look, what we're going to teach you how to do is take this and be able to go out on your own and measure the market in reference to what you need to be able, the monies, whatever funds that is, whatever sum of money that is, that you want to make. Create that entrepreneur because, again, unions and those companies, they're going to do what they can because it's good public relations. But at the end of the day, we don't know how long they keep those kids, what turnover that creates. They could hire 10 kids every year by bringing in a kid, keep them for a year, turnover, get 10 more. Good public relations for them. It doesn't necessarily produce the outcomes that we initially think we're doing or we're creating or helping create. So I'm just saying I think that sometimes kids at that age, they're looking for answers and don't know how to ask the question. To say, hey, teach me how to take this and make it work beyond just, if I don't get the job, I still have a talent that I still have to find a way to make a living with. I still have to pay rent, so how do I use this in the open marketplace? And I think that what I've seen is more kids with those particular types of degrees, they're honestly on their own. They're not working all for the Ameren. Yes, there are some that work for Ameren. Yes, there are some that work for Fire. Yes, there are some that work for Anheuser-Busch. They're the lucky ones. But our numbers exceed the lucky few.
So the economic reality of 2022 is we have unprecedented opportunities for young people leaving our programs. 2022 has been unlike any year that I've seen in the world of career and technical education, even at the post-secondary lens. When I was at Rankin Technical College and St. Louis Community College, we did not have the level of demand from those established companies. The baby boomers are finally leaving. They are retiring. They're taking the buyouts. They're taking those opportunities, and there is not a young new wave coming in behind them. Right. Our students have unprecedented numbers of opportunities now, more than ever, and with the groups that we're partnering with, people like the Clayco Community Development Initiative, they are retaining our students. Those students are staying in the field, and we're seeing long-term success stories because those students are coming back and mentoring the students that we have currently enrolled in our programs, where success is breeding success is breeding success. And so we're at a tipping point where if employers are not open to a more diverse workforce, they're not going to have a workforce.
Yes, sorry, three more questions. A few years ago, when I was at North Tech, one of the auto teachers mentioned, please get us an electric car. We're get electric cars to the auto.
So we're in the process of it. We've tried to buy one twice. The supply chain has been a problem. So we are working on it, and it's something that we are planning to do in the FY23 budget cycle. Right. And we're just trying to buy a car. If anyone's tried to buy a car in the last year, it's an adventure, especially if you're looking for something specific. And with our purchasing process, we're not able to get it off the ground.
Gotcha, but it is.
It is something that we are aspiring to. Yes.
We're going to get a used electric car.
That is correct. Which again adds in a layer of complication for us.
Just want to make sure we're.
And then about the applying process.
It's been turned in.
Do they apply at the beginning of their sophomore year, at the end of their sophomore year? When do they apply for their junior course?
Great question. So the application cycle opens the Monday after Labor Day week. So the second week of September typically is when we open the cycle, so students can begin applying. And they can apply at any time, but programs will begin filling typically around February, so a student's going to want to apply before that. The sooner they apply, the better off they're going to be, just as far as us receiving all the paperwork and everything and maximizing the opportunity for that student. At the same time, we don't want to have a student not be able to access a program because of when we were able to get to their school to talk to them. And so that's why we don't begin accepting students until after Thanksgiving. We want to give some opportunity to really promote what we're doing and make sure we're getting in front of as many students as humanly possible so that they're aware of what exists.
When you target students, when you go in and talk to students, are you talking to the freshmen then mostly? So they know?
Typically, so in the fall semester, our admissions representatives will be working with sophomores, encouraging them to apply now. As we transition to around winter break, the switch kind of flips, and then freshmen become that target audience.
Yeah. Last question. Do it also plumbing?
Plumbing is a part of our general construction trades program. We used to have a standalone plumbing program. Trying to recruit 15 and 16-year-olds into a program called plumbing was a very challenging process. Did not sound very appealing, but they're open to enrolling in construction trades where they're going to spend a quarter doing plumbing and pipe fitting, and if a student wants to go that route, they most certainly can, but we just struggled with a standalone plumbing program. It's got a perception issue where construction trades doesn't have that same perception issue.
Okay. Thank you for everything. Does anyone else? Yes.
I just want to say, obviously, this is a source of much interest to us, as you can tell by all of our questions. And so I really look forward to you coming back and sharing more information, because just like Scott was saying, and you were saying about the unprecedented job situation, this is something that's on everybody's mind. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for taking so much time.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. All right. Next on our agenda is 2.02, update on equity plan.
Good evening, Vice President Patrick, President Cuneo, Board of Directors. My name is Molly Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. And with me tonight, I have Dr. Macklin, the Director of Equity, and we are here to present the equity updates and do a little bit more work with you from our retreat that we just had. Was that 2 weeks ago, last week? 2 weeks ago, yeah. So.
Great. Again, President Cuneo, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan, Vice President Patroff, happy to be here. So the purpose of this evening is really to take a look at the equity work that has been completed this year and also seek feedback on the professional learning plan. As you guys can remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had some intimate moments as it relates to equity and working together hand in hand to take a look at the indicators and also the professional learning and feedback and really the process, and also remember that session, really a couple of engaging icebreakers that Dr. Cuneo really liked, and so we will look at those pieces as we go from here today. So the first piece is that I want to update you really on the equity action steps from the framework, the collective action steps, and really the timelines and what that really looks like. Remember, in our conversation, we talked a lot about metrics, right? Implementation and evidence, And so truly, those metrical pieces are here, and being able to measure those pieces are here, and so that is where we are here. Great. And so to this point, their targeted groups total has been 65 groups as it relates to framing the frameworks. A couple of points I want to note about that and really highlight. And so of the 65 groups, 63 have been completed and 2 scheduled. And so even though that says 65 groups, for example, transportation, I presented to that group 8 times because just the need as it relates to our transportation workers, right? We truly believe that everyone, all should have an opportunity to experience and as it relates to professional learning. And so that piece is key. But also, as we talk about measuring and metric, remember, here 95% of individuals who participated in the framework training felt like the training was influential and that it could impact their learning, and 94% felt like they could take strategies immediately to impact their work. Remember, implementation and evidence, right? Also developed a professional learning plan, which you guys had a great look at as we took a look at the courses and drafted and completed those changes. To date, I think we're right at 14 courses. We did Director Moeller and Director Asner add that youth culture course, right? And so that is also a piece in the professional learning plan from there. Policy reviews, which is really ongoing. Policy reviews, which is a huge piece as it relates to focus for this year, really being able to ensure that their systems are more equitable, and that looking through the lens of equity, especially as you're looking at policies, and asking the question, who do policies unintentionally, again, not intentionally, but unintentionally marginalize, and do those individuals have a voice? Ongoing work with equity teams in the schools. You guys did receive probably roughly around 3 weeks ago a mid-year update of what that looks like of each team and what the metric is and what the status is of each team in the school, and you also received that report at the end of the year. And then also working to collaborate on equity strategies to include more diverse communities in decision-making activities. Remember, diverse, the definition of diverse, right, we talk about differences. So those who have differences, right, and celebrating those differences that make them unique and then including them in the decision-making process. When we talk about focus areas for 2022, 2023, so of course to now implement the professional learning plan that we worked on and has been put together as it relates to all those different online and blended options, of course, it's just as we did implement the framework this year with high fidelity. Also, to be able to collaborate on equity strategies to recruit and retain a more diverse staff. Again, that word diverse, which is differences. And again, these are focuses for 2022, 2023. Also to ensure that when we're looking at our assessment tools, that there are no biases in the assessment tools. If we all have biases, truly, how do we ensure that those biases are not impacting individuals through the tools that we use? And then lastly, here to finish up, taking a look at the revision process through the change of placement, and then also using that through a file review. Again, those are the focus areas for 2022, 2023, which are highlighted in the collective actions of the framework. So now, when we talk about the professional learning plan, which of course is another key piece here as it relates to the learning piece, right? Really want to focus here on the feedback that was given, and I will say that all the feedback that was given from 2 weeks ago was implemented into the professional learning plan. And so using more student examples, understanding that we wanted to bring back that student experience, that those pieces were implemented into the courses. Also, adding role play. We want to be engaging as possible, and understanding that staff being able to role play definitely creates that engagement, especially on our blended courses. Again, creating a session on youth culture, and then when delving into that, finding out that now the hip-hop generation is now from age 11 till 25. And so, that's right. Didn't know that, all right? Neither did I, right? And so, delving into those pieces. Now you can be older than 25 and still like hip hop. Okay, let me make that caveat for the eyes I'm getting in the room looking at me, Director Faulkner. You can be older than that. However, that is designated in 2022 hip hop age here. Also, looking at our vector courses. Our vector courses to ensure that there are strategies and adding more strategies and more outcomes, just to be more specific, so we can be laser-like focused regarding the vector courses. We added accomplice to the glossary. Remember, there are a couple key terms that we wanted to take a look at: ally and accomplice, right? Allies are those persons who will stand with you, but those accomplices are persons who stand with you to systemically break down barriers that marginalize individuals. So adding that to the glossary. Also, was very careful, Director Asner, with the LGBTQ plus, right? And to make sure that terminology and that verbiage was there. Also added in a bullying scenario for the sexual orientation and gender, and then looked at the system support really for the whole IEP team. Right, and recommending that for whole IEP teams to take together, to learn together. Learning together is powerful. And then looking at the allyship course, that was the vector for that to be for all audiences.
All right, so at the board retreat, we ran out of time because we were digging in so deep. And so we do want to remember we gave you a little bit of homework to check out the equity indicators. So want to just take a little bit of time tonight to talk a little bit about those and then receive some feedback from you guys. So the purpose of the equity indicators is really not only to track progress towards those educational outcomes and goals, but also look at those differences in outcomes and opportunities amongst student groups in our schools. And so you'll see the word subgroups here, but I think I mentioned last time we presented we're going to change that term to student groups, and that's a term that DESE is embracing, which I'm excited about, and so we'll make sure we're embracing that as well. We did reference this article, Building Educational Indicators Systems, Guidebooks for State and School Districts. And so this is what we kind of based a lot of our work on as we developed these equity indicators. The process we use is we really review those indicators and the research behind each one of those indicators within the study, and then we propose some of those indicators that really focused in on what SSD holds core as values, and really thinking about measurements that we could utilize to make sure those indicators are in place and impactful. And then we took those to gather stakeholder feedback, and that's the current phase we're in right now. Again, you guys being stakeholders, asking for feedback from you. So basically, we looked at 4 major areas for the indicators, those being access to high-quality, effective teaching, having a stable learning environment and having access to that, student engagement, and then that post-secondary success. So under each one of those areas, you'll see a series of indicators that contribute to those areas. So, for example, the high-quality, effective teaching, looking at certified teachers, experienced teachers, as well as teachers who look like our students. When you look at stable learning environment, looking at that staff turnover, looking at those mid-year vacancies, which, nationwide has increased lately, looking at the teacher's attendance as well as the class membership and discipline practices. When we look at student engagement, we're definitely looking at what kind of supports we have in place for students, looking at their attendance, and then programs and placements that we have available for those students. Post-secondary success, looking at some of those prerequisite courses for college and career readiness, as well as graduation and those post-secondary outcomes, which Kevin talked about previously. We also developed a rubric for those indicators. And the purpose of this rubric is really to help not only us, but potentially our directors in our partner districts and in our SSD schools to look for opportunities that we can target for improvement around the area of equity. It's also going to help us progress monitor our journey as a district with equity, and then making sure we're headed towards those equitable outcomes that we want to see for our students. So with that, you have the equity indicators as well as that rubric. So I would like for you to pull out that handout that you have for the rubric, and would like to get a little bit of feedback. Yeah.
Do we have the capacity factor now data? By which I mean, it may turn out that there's some strong correlation between some of these outcomes as we're measuring. So would we be able to show that, or are we able to analyze the data?
So analyze it. Tell me again, in what way?
So looking for common factors. So for example, it may be that access to experienced teachers and disparities in graduation and post-secondary outcomes not to be closely correlated.
Yeah.
They may be highly correlated. And if so, it really should be one outcome, one outcome that we're measuring. So I'm curious if we can study that, if we have the ability to do that here.
I do believe we would have the ability to study that.
I would be interested to see if there are correlations.
And again, we'll look at correlation, not necessarily.
Right. But if it's if it turns out they're extremely similar, maybe that we're looking at one factor, which is access to experienced teachers. Maybe we shouldn't just be looking at outcomes. Right?
Absolutely. looking at those, indicators as well as the rubric, do you feel like, the rubric is matching, the indicators and are good measures of those indicators? That's the first question, if you'd like.
I have a question on racial and ethnic diversity of teachers. I've read articles that goes both ways. That I read an article that said it is an excellent idea to have, first of all, the reality of the situation is we have difficulty with color. Service teachers. Better to place those in our districts where where the students would be of the same colors as them, or is it better to place them in another district? And I've read articles telling me that it's best to do it both ways. I'm just wondering, what's your opinion?
My opinion, personally, is that we need to, try our best so that our students see, people that look like them in the authoritarian,
Well, I read that, but then I read this other article that says, based upon the limited numbers.
Right.
We need to show other populations, we have, high achieving individuals of color. And so that's, that was their belief. I was wondering, based on the grounds that we have a limited number.
I think we just keep trying, though. I think we,
I know.
and that's where we're looking.
We should try to get more
Strategies, yes.
I'm trying to figure out.
Strategies such as grow your own. We're using strategies such as looking at, historically black colleges and universities to be able to recruit from. So I think we're using a lot of good strategies in order to diversify our workforce.
Well, I think that's great. But what happens if you have a limited number? I mean, where do you make sure that if you have a limited number of African Americans, those African Jennings, all teach in Hazelwood, all teach in primarily black areas? I'm not sure that's good.
And I think, I think the reality is teachers can pretty much choose where they go right now because there's such a shortage. We have some teachers who are very passionate about serving their own community and often, request to be in their community schools. And so, I honor that as best we can.
And I'm not just picking on that, but
Sure.
The fact that teachers can pick where they want to go, okay? We have to convince teachers then to pick their.
A lot of our teachers, as we recruit and who's done most, we give them options, but we have equal number of teachers in Hazelwood versus. We track also the teachers who are that go into voluntary, and we want to make sure that we keep that at a level. One of the areas I noticed when I first came here was everybody was saying that we Hazelwood. Start to look at the data, that's not true. You actually see more moving from Rockwood, and generally it's because of the distance and where they're driving from, and that's an impact. So we want to make sure that as much as possible, we post our positions, we give our teachers options. But teachers are very particular that they want to be in Hazelwood or Jennings or Riverview Gardens. We absolutely continue to do that. We have lower vacancy rates right now. So we have 10 vacancies right now within our we are able to provide the accessibility and support for our staff.
And I think too, Doctor, like every area, not from here, but for example, there was a period that probably, if you were to ask a working person wherever they want to work, and Anheuser-Busch was probably one of the top places. I think that.
Before any bit, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Back in the fifties and the sixties, it
Yeah,
was.
I mean, if you ask just a person off the street, where would you like to work, one of their first places probably would have been A and B. As we begin to put in place, my thoughts, these particular practices become known for these practices as a true effort, then perhaps we can establish that kind of identity that then would help attract more people to even out that scenario that we're dealing with. Opposite of that tends to go back into segregation. I don't think that's what anyone wants to do in our society, even though there are books that I've read that says that that might be best moving forward in many ways, tribalism. But I just think that at the end of the day, once we as an institution get that reputation, and if we build this, then we'll begin to attract, because people are looking for, kind of like what I was telling Kevin, you know, kids are looking for it right now. They're looking for the immediacy of now. So adults, that same group that he's talking about, the babies, the hip-hoppers, they're looking for the right now because they don't have the affordability to wait. And so whatever they do, they're looking for it to pay off more readily than perhaps you and our generation, we may have had time to mess around. Today's society doesn't allow that very much for young kids. And so I think that as we accomplish these things and metrics that we put in place to be able to say, we've done this in a timely fashion, that then becomes part of our attraction as an institution.
So, one of the things that I want to note that, you know, Johns Hopkins University did a great research study, and that research study focused on really on individuals and truly understanding, you know, that individuals who look through the lens of equity and who have a lens of equity become more and more powerful and are passionate about the work. I think in our human resources group that we work with, the one thing that was noted during the human resources group, through all their interviews and the phases and the research that we did, even by McMahon and Berger, the one thing that was noted is that persons, when they are looking for places to work, they want to know the organization, the company stands on social justice. They want to know what does that lens look like and how passionate they are. So there are passionate individuals across this country who are allies and accomplices who will teach students anywhere and everywhere to ensure that they're successful.
And to add to that, I think because of our focus on equity and the great work we're doing around that, that is going to attract people who have that same value. Kind of back to it, looking at those, the rubrics for the equity indicators. You know.
I have a quick question. The teacher certified is like criteria for level 1 not met. Aren't all of our teachers certified?
Yes. Okay. Yes, all of our teachers are certified. Yeah. Again, this is based on the, you know, some national research.
Okay.
So that we would not be in that category.
So do we need to measure that data and report on it?
We do report on it, and I do think, I mean, we are in a teacher shortage, so will there be a time where we may not be able to get all certified teachers? Let's hope it doesn't happen, but it could.
So in other words, you think this would be like a valuable equity indicator for us at this point?
I do feel like it could be. If we see over a long trend that it's not, and if we see the job market, you know, not becoming as dire as it is right now, then that's something we would take off in the future. But I do think in the state of states we are right now as a nation, and our teacher shortages, it's something we have to think about.
This allows us to compare to other schools.
Correct.
School districts.
Right. The other thing we're kind of looking at with this rubric is, do you feel like this will support administrators in looking at their data? within their district through that equity lens.
Yes, the administrators that question.
We will, yes. Going to live stakeholders, remember, yeah.
No questions, sorry. On info of school suspensions and all sorts of actions, how much that is the teacher's choice and how much that is the principal's between someone above them choice?
And I think it varies. I think we have some systems, I think you can see that through our SPP data. We have some systems that do not do well with that indicator. So to me, that is a systematic issue, and we need to work on the system. However, I think if you look at classrooms that maybe have a strong system for that, but there are individual teachers who may also be removing students from their educational setting more frequently than others. So then we can look at what can we do to support that teacher in keeping those students in class, because we know that's so important.
Very. Okay, I just want to make sure we weren't putting on a teacher something that wasn't.
Okay, we would look at it more from a systematic level.
Okay, I just have one question.
Yeah.
About, under high quality effective teaching, the racial, ethnic diversity, is there a reason why Asian isn't included, is there, or why only Black, Hispanic, and mostly racial?
That's a great question. We will make sure we put that in there. No, that's fine, thank you.
I have a question on your access to a stable learning environment. Are we talking teachers here, are we talking teachers and paras? And if we're talking teachers and paras, that's fine. If not, can we have a similar one that deals with paras? Because I find the paras are the ones that end up seeing kids many times more often than anybody else.
So which one are you looking at?
Indicators of a stable learning environment. 80% of teachers in the same placement as last year.
So you'd like for us to also include parents in
Yeah,
that?
was that included in that or?
It is not. So we
Do
could,
we need a separate thing for them? I'm just
I
wondering.
think we could do another line. Because I do think that's a.
Yeah, I just find many times having the same parent is probably more important than anything else.
Yeah, we can include that in there. I think that's a great idea.
I've got a question about student engagement indicators. Some fellow colleagues at Parkway North had a discussion about gathering data from recent graduates in North and asking if they, on a spectrum or on a scale, how they have felt as insiders or outsiders, kind of the idea of marginalization and back them down, feeling an insider, one feels valued and included at all times, and as an outsider, feeling marginalized and not included, obviously. So are you open to, have you considered that as a data point to collect from our students and recent graduates? Perhaps going on that, going into this, if we proceed through the framework and our schedule on this, I wonder if that would be a valuable data point to this.
Definitely, we can look at how to incorporate something like that in there.
Under discipline practices, I'm curious. We're talking, what percentage of students, we're not breaking that down. Yeah. Color?
We would,
Okay,
yeah.
that was my question.
Gender.
Yeah, can we somehow tie that very same thing to our disproportionality? In other words, how we're funding it. In other words, I figured, if you've got it, it's always nice to say,
Yeah.
this is where we're putting our money, this is how we're doing it.
So we did do that with the suspension rates. You might notice that, in that report, it was in a Friday packet,
Right.
probably three or 4 weeks ago, that Matt Trevor did do that analysis, looking at the disproportionality with that.
That's why I was wondering, could we include that into our discipline practices? Because we already have the hard numbers.
Yeah. So as a comparison.
Yes.
As a comparison. The other.
It also tells district-wise, too.
feedback you might have for us.
I'm not seeing, I may just be missing it. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm just gonna ask for it. For the students who go to like New Warner and who may not be going, college is not their next place, or a day program might be, where they're still the most useful. So is that one of the options, like to see college and technical school?
Yeah, so that's where we're looking at that post-secondary outcome. So what you're going to hear in another presentation that I'll be presenting to you in a few minutes is in our CSIP plan, we are looking at, and our CSIP plan, we are looking at definitions of what is positive post-secondary placement beyond that, the state. What does SSD see as positive post-secondary placement? To your point, many of our students, a day program is a positive back into them.
Okay, good, because just because they aren't going to Harvard doesn't mean they're not.
Absolutely.
I would add a vocational skills program to the positive outcomes.
Yes, absolutely, it is, yes. As you're looking at processing through, if something strikes you in the middle of the night and you wake up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Can we call in the middle of the night?
Maybe an email.
Nobody will answer.
I'll leave a message.
Actually, I might be up in it. You never know.
Okay, you gotta watch her. What we wanted to do is to give this, and this is some great feedback so far, but we are also going to add this back onto the agenda. Any other further feedback, we can take that through email if you want to send us an email, looking at it, because we know there's a lot of information here to digest. So we want to be able to, before this is formally adopted, we want to make sure that we have the full voice of everybody around the table. And,
I don't know if we're trying to make sense, but do we have any plans to include like LGBT? Okay. Like, I don't know how that.
The challenge would be they would have to self-identify.
Right.
And that way, as we, like, race and ethnicity, those are things we keep in the database because those are indicators. They would have to self-identify for us to be able to do that.
yeah, and I think it's always something that we want to, as we continue to grow, where do we yield it?
For students who do identify that way, how they.
Have to be honor that and,
I think that would be a complex issue, because the question would be, when would you also collect that data? I assume some of the data is collected once, and that sort of data would be data to collect sequentially over time, since as kids mature and grow up, how they self-identify might change. So I can see how that would be extraordinarily complex.
Yeah, I just wanted to make you maybe on our.
absolutely appreciate that.
Any other questions for
No, that's okay, we just kind of incorporated.
Yeah.
Okay, and just to let you know that we will report out on these indicators annually. So you'll receive an annual report. When we do the equity update, we'll also be including these equity indicators and measurements in that report annually, once they are adopted by.
So we'll take the comments that are given,
Yep.
bring it back on the 26th, and then we'll see if you guys have any further.
Hopefully move to adoption.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is 2.03, the tiered literacy support and literacy plan.
Good evening, Dr. Poptroff.
Oh,
Dr.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Vice President Potroff, Dr. Cuneo, Dr. Keenan, and Board of Directors. I'm Wendy Pitteret, Chief Academic Officer, and this is Dr. Molly Bolton, and we will be talking to you tonight about our tiered literacy programs and plans in the district. Next slide. So basically what we want to do is go over the purpose of how we are going to deliver literacy instruction in this district, both in our SSD schools and then how we also partner in the district, and the variety of ways and truly make the connections getting back to the basic of about this time last year, we were talking to you about focus on instruction, about our integrated models that we do in collaboration with both our partner districts and our schools, our gap analysis that our directors do with the literacy programs that are happening, of course, all of the professional learning and the literacy guides that we have available. That would be the documents that you have sitting in front of you. Bye. So if you remember about this time last year, we had talked about really looking at the deliberateness of having one director in each district, having that support be there and have that presence as the administrator in everything that we would do as special school district, but really collaborate with all of the programming that we had going on in our partner districts, looking at adding instructional coaches to all of our districts, really starting to look at our integrated models. When we start doing that, having one person meet with our liaisons and group. We did a nice job with our multiple gap analysis and really having that tied to both what our strategic and CSIP plan is, but really looking at the plans that are happening in the partner districts as well. And then we also talked about literacy coaches, so literacy coaches, instructional coaches, social emotional coaches, and the variety that we have throughout the district. Next slide. So in our partner districts, what we wanted to look at is really have our directors sitting down and being that voice at the table, of course, working with our partner districts. Partner districts have their own literacy plans, have their own math plans when it comes to how they address and provide instruction throughout their district, but also partner with them on the professional development piece. We've also done monthly literacy connections with small groups and directors as we meet with them, so we hear some of the issues that I've shared with the board members about some of the literacy that's happening in the district. Talk with our literacy coaches, really asking our teachers what they need, what they've been trained in, what content or what tiered models they need support in, what they can implement in their classrooms. And then, of course, by that, those plans should really drive their professional development plan. So if there's areas that we're working on that we need improvement on, or there are different interventions at different tiers that we need to be trained on, our directors and coordinators would know that. Next slide. In our schools, we tried for the last several years to have one-on-one reading interventionists, as well as our Title I programs with us being special school district. Other districts don't necessarily have special education and title, but we have them both. So that's a plus for our students. Facilitators that support actually walk in with reading instruction that Dr. Glazer, is he a doctor? I'm making everybody a doctor tonight. Mr. Glazer, he is a doctor. Glazer, that he supports our facilitators in the schools and actually helps support them. And then professional development, really cater what's happening. If you're in our SSD schools and programs, really identify what those tiered interventions look like, what are those literacy interventions, as well as, of course, math and social emotional, that we need to make sure that our staff is understands and able to implement with fidelity. Next slide. And Dr. Bolton is going to take the literacy tiers.
So as we talk about those things, we just want to share definitions. When we say tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what are we talking about? So when we look at tier 1, we're really talking about what we call that core program. That is the literacy instruction that all students get. Typically in a general education environment in our schools, it would be the basic literacy instruction that they're getting in the classroom. And you can see it encompasses the 5 major areas of reading and many of the skills that go with reading. We also look at the assessments, and at tier 1 level, the kinds of assessments we'd be looking at are what we call universal screening. Many of our school districts have screenings that they do at 1, 2, 3 times a year to ensure that students are on track or on grade level. And if not, then they're identified and then moved into tier 2 for intervention. Next slide, please. So then our tier 2 really provides some of that systematic instruction. Typically, we say up to 3 of those foundational skills. So if we have a student who is lacking in, when we think about those 5 big areas, if they're lacking in 3 of those areas, then we would consider them for Tier 2. Then we would move them into small groups for very specific strategy instructions around that. Typically, those groups, the literature tells us, should meet 3 to 4 times a week for about 20 to 40 minutes and should be very focused with explicit instruction on those skills, those foundational skills that they might be missing. When we look at assessment in this area, we're looking at some progress monitoring. So at least monthly to determine that the students are making progress. So when that benchmarking comes back around again, we're able to get them closer to or on grade level. Our Tier 3 is our most intensive and supported instruction, and so this is in addition to that core instruction, additional daily instruction to really help students become more proficient. Oftentimes, if we have students who are not successful in that Tier 2, we would then move them to a Tier 3 intervention and increase the frequency and intensity of the instruction that those students are receiving in reading areas. And then we would be progress monitoring them weekly at that level. Next slide. You do have a sample integrated tiered model in your packet from Acton School District. And looks like this. And so that is in your packet, so you can see. I only have the literacy portion of this. In these integrated tiered models, we also include math and SEL, but for our purposes tonight, we're focused in on the literacy. We are finishing our 3rd revision right now, cycle of these models. The purpose of this was to really capture what each partner district is using for their core instruction, for their Tier 2 and their Tier 3, including resources and material and assessments that they are using in their district. By doing this really helps us then move into our gap analysis. Go to the next slide, please. So in our gap analysis, we're then able to really look at the current state versus the desired state of where we might be, and the gap between the two. Reasons for the gap between those might be based on knowledge, skills, or practices, and we do have our administrators identify where that gap might be occurring and what the cause might be, and then create an action plan then to address that gap. Do you mind going back to the previous slide? I forgot to show you. If you will click on that integrated tiered model, please, the hyperlink. Up at the blue up at the top. I did want to show you where you can find these on SSD on our website. So these are on our public website. And so this is under Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. You will find a list of all the integrated models as well as the professional learning plan listed by district.
Where is that on the website?
So if you go to the website and you go under Teaching, Learning, and Accountability, which is under the Special Education tab. Am I right about that? Nope. Go back to, About Us. Yep, there it is, sorry. Okay. And then go over to Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. Sorry, on SSD Life, it's under Special Education. On the website, it's under About Us. And then if you look on the side there, where it goes down to Partner, District, Integrated, Tiered Models, and Professional Learning Plans, and then you're able to actually click on each district's plan. So if you would like to see the plans for your district, they are there. We will be updating. As I said, we're in our 3rd revision cycle. We're in the process of doing our final review of those, and so those new ones should be posted by June at the latest, maybe even potentially sometime in May. Thank you for navigating that.
Thank you.
So with that gap analysis, we do determine then those action steps that might be needed to meet that gap in the district. Next slide, please. From that gap analysis, then we are able to create our professional learning plans, which are found in that same place that we just linked you to. With that, we look at what is the opportunity that we've noticed in our gap analysis. And then, which tier are we really supporting with that opportunity? Is it tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or is it multiple tiers? In some cases, it could be. We look at, is this a partner district-driven professional learning, or is this a specialized instruction opportunity? And with that, we have many of our partner districts that do have initiatives going on, and so we want to be able to capture that, because what we've often heard from our voice of customer, from our teachers is, hey, I have to do all this professional learning for Parkway, and I have to do all this professional learning for SSD. So in our way to kind of balance that, this is a way to capture everything that's going on in the district, so we're not overwhelming our teachers. Also, within there, we look at the format of that training. If it's in person, how many days it might be. If it's online, where they can do it asynchronously. We also look at who the presenter might be for that, the time frame that they will be trained in. We actually list out the teachers who might be trained, especially if it's a specific program, and it's not every teacher. And is it a mandatory training or an optional training? We feel like that's very important as well. And then any additional information that they might think that's important for us to include. So then our professional learning department, once these plans are created, can harvest this information, and that really helps us plan. For example, how many corrective reading trainings are we going to need based on how many districts have that on their plan? How many people are we looking at going forward with Wilson training? And those sorts of things, so we can kind of make those decisions moving forward and making sure we have enough opportunities for our teachers to train. Next slide, please. We also have some supports that are available on SSD Life as well as on our website page. So the first being the Literacy Resource Guide, which we did make a copy for you of that as well. This is a list of programs and interventions that have been vetted by our literacy coaches, and we do train and support everything that is listed in this guide. We also have our Literacy Intervention Guide, and that is a list of strategies and interventions that are also supporting literacy instruction. That intervention guide document is often used in our data team process. When we have students who we're looking at their data, they may not be making the progress we'd like to see. They have this guide available to go in and look at some other potential interventions that might be available for those students. And then lastly, if you will click on that intervention selection map, I do want to kind of walk through this process with you, and I believe you do have this as a handout as well. And I know this looks really busy, so just bear with me for a moment. And
how are we getting, if we're not there, is there a way to get this right off of the website also?
It is.
Right.
Yes, but
All
you
of
can
those links, click on those links, and it'll
there
take
you
you right
go.
to
If
the
I
site.
went straight to the website, where would I go for this?
So this is actually on our intranet site, so this is on our SSD Live site, this particular one.
I'm being prompted to log in when I click on the link here.
Yeah, because that's the intranet, that's our SSD Live. The resource guide is available on our website under Teaching, Learning, and Accountability, and if you go to literacy, you'll be able to find that resource guide. That is on the public website. The intervention guide, as well as the intervention decision-making map, are on our intranet on SSD Live. So what we do here is we, at the very top up there, you'll see we identify the need of the student. And so that could be a specific skill strand, or that could be more multiple skill strands, right, that the student may be struggling with. From that point, if it's just maybe a single strand, we might just be looking at some strategies that might work for that, to strengthen that deficit area. If it's more comprehensive, we probably would be looking at a program that you find in our resource guide. And so then we list those potential choices there. Next, we go down and we look at some factors that may come into play in our decision-making with this. And so if you look in the orange as I'm facing this on the far right, you will see how much time does this take? And how much time do I have available for this student to service them? Do I service students in a homogeneous environment, meaning all of our students have the same needs? Or, am I seeing the student at a time where I may have students that have all different kinds of needs? Because because that's going to impact the fidelity and the type of strategy that we may use with that student. Also looking at, do we have staff support for that particular intervention or strategy? And are we in a setting that we can provide that with fidelity? As we go on, and then as they're answering those questions, that helps us narrow our strategies and programs that might be most appropriate. If we scroll down, you'll also see group size is something we look at. And so then from there, we kind of get to the point of our structures are compatible. Here are some choices we might have. And then we think if the structures are not, is there a way that we can change those structures? For example, if I have a heterogeneous group and I really need to do explicit instruction for this program to do it with fidelity, is there a way I can rearrange the schedules so that we can have a more homogeneous group that I can really do this direct instruction program with them? If we can do that, you can see we continue on. If we can't, then we have to reconsider our choices. Once we get to a point where we feel like we have the structures in place, we know what the skill deficits are, then we flip over to the back side of this, or the page 2, and this is some additional considerations that we look at. So, does this particular intervention have a strong evidence base? We are by law mandated that we use evidence and research-based practices, both by ESSA and by IDEA. And so we want to make sure that whatever we're using has that strong base. Will you be able to implement it with fidelity? Because if we can't implement it with fidelity, we can't get the results that we need, or that are promised through the evidence base. Will you be able, if you're not able to implement it with fidelity, then maybe we need to consider something different. Also looking at our behaviors, does the student exhibit behaviors that might impede the fidelity of our implementation? And if so, is this the best choice at this time? So maybe we'll make some adjustments to the behavior management or the behavior improvement plan, but maybe everything's good and we'll keep going. Does this strategy or program require training? And if so, do you have it? And if you don't, how are you going to get it? To make sure our teachers have the training that they need to implement the program with fidelity. And I keep saying that a lot, I know, because that's really important. And then also looking at, is this intervention aligned with our core instruction? So oftentimes when we look at our core instruction, we are looking either to augment our core, which is the best, but in some cases, if there is not a strong core in place in that school district, we're looking at supplementing that core. And so it's really important that we find that happy medium with that as well as we're looking at these programs. So it's not just willy-nilly, hey, I have this on the shelf, this is what I'm going to use. We want our teachers to be very thoughtful in the interventions and strategies that they're choosing to support our students in literacy. Go back to the PowerPoint, please. So some of the professional opportunities that we have ongoing right now that you can find in our professional learning guide is we do have a foundational literacy training. That has been lettered, which was offered by Voyager. We are looking at a different program for next year because they are changing their training formats in letters, which would require our teachers to do approximately 12 hours for 4 different modules, all online. And we are just not happy with that sort of training. We would rather have in-person and places where they can do application and come back together as a group and talk about it. We feel like our teachers do better with that sort of training. So we are investigating other options at this time. Also looking at teacher workload. That's a lot of workload to put on a teacher, 12 times 4 in a school year. So really kind of thinking about those pieces as well. We do offer a dyslexia overview, and we offer trainings for everything that you see in this program guide for literacy. We also offer a literacy assessment training called the Jerry Johns Basic Reading Inventory. And that is if your district does not have a strong literacy assessment, we do recommend that our teachers go through that so that they can have a strong literacy assessment. We also have a course for literacy supports for students on the alternative standards. So those are our students who are accessing and assessed on the MAP-A, and what their literacy instruction should look like according to their research. We do have a couple of things coming up for next year. One is a literacy best practice guide, and that just goes over a lot of the research around literacy and best practices in that, as well as we've got a couple of pilots that we're doing around literacy. One being Teen Stars, which is a Linda Mood Bell program, and the other being Teach Town, which is a program centered around ABA principles for our students who would benefit from that ABA type instruction. That is the end of our presentation. What questions do you have?
Questions. You were saying that the 3 times a year do assessments, starting at kindergarten or early? Okay, good.
And in fact, there may be more frequent, depending, if a student, like I said, if a student is not at grade level, you're going to be assessing them more frequently because you want to make sure the instruction that you're doing with them is helping them grow and close that gap. The earlier, the better.
Right, that's what I was hoping you were going to say. And then in the, where you were saying 3 to 5 times a week for 20 to 40 minutes as an example, are those 20 to 40 minutes each time or?
No, each time.
Okay, okay.
I do, Dr. Bolton, Dr. Pendergrass. You mentioned a fair amount in there about implementing these programs with fidelity, and I appreciate that explanation. I think it answers my question. Because when I have some familiarity with ELA teachers in the building, I'm not one, but in the curriculum and that they are implementing and with resource guide, list of resources that you have available here. Like many of us, read on occasion of individuals or programs that are, floating around, who bring up maybe kind of reading celebrations, almost like cultural events that they bring to the school and get the excitement up and have readers who are really strongly connected and identifying with kids and vice versa. Is there, I know you mentioned the legal requirements that we have, but is there wiggle room for us? Are there ways in which SSD is connected to those kind of innovative kind of programs who are beyond the scripts that we have here? Comment on that.
So what I would say is that, yes, we do look at opportunities like that. One that we have partnered with in past years was Springboard to Learning, and that was an experience with storytellers coming into the classroom in our SSD schools and really promoting, and then they connected that to the students' writing, and students wrote stories either as a whole class or wrote stories individually, depending on the level of the student and the abilities of that student, so that has been very successful and very well received by our students, and they got very excited about reading and about writing their own stories. So absolutely, and then we actually that was through a grant from Kennedy Center in our partnership with Springboard, and we actually published a book about the experiences we had in that setting, so it was really good. It was a portion of it.
And that's ongoing?
We did not do it this year. They did not get funding from Kennedy Center this year. Kennedy Center lost a lot of funding this year, and so we were not able to continue that program this year, but we have done it, I believe, for 4 years. We have done that program. So.
Is a situation where we brought the funding forward, could we get that started again? If it's
potentially, yeah. Partnering.
Something that, would you mind bringing, or if we could get follow-up on that in our next meeting?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Sounds like I just knowing what gets kids excited about reading, I think that is very much one of those things. So.
Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bolden, Dr. Pendergrass.
I'll take the word on.
Still saying. Second meeting was.
All right, next on our agenda is 2.04, the strategic and CSIP plan for 2022 to 2027.
Ms. Potroff, Dr. Cuneo, board members, superintendent, my name is Paul Bauer. I've been working since previous summer of last year, working to develop a strategic plan for the district. I'm going to give Dr. Bolton a breather here for a few minutes, and I'll do the talking. Wanted to talk with you about where we are with the strategic plan, particularly in how we're planning to implement it and how we are planning to do some performance measures for the district. So the purpose of the presentation is to give you an update on the preparations. We are going through to implement the plan starting July 1st and provide the board some information about performance reports. Back up to the very beginning, why we are even doing this, mission, vision of the district, support and empower students to achieve their potential. Next slide, please. From the mission and vision, we have our core values, equity, collaboration, commitment. When you think strategically, all of your actions are consistent with one of the core values and are directed at accomplishing the district mission. So that is something that hopefully the strategic plan will kind of plant the seed and get things going as far as the district really thinking strategically in terms of, is this the decision going to help us fulfill our mission? Is this decision consistent with equity, commitment, and collaboration? Next slide, please. So we went through a pretty lengthy and a pretty rigorous process in developing the strategic plan. You've all heard that a couple times, so I won't go through it again. But as a refresher, we decided on 3 priority areas: systems, resources, and relational communications. Meaning, we need to work on having systematic, data-based, standardized, consistent procedures. We need to have consistent, equitable procedures for distributing, allocating, and identifying needed resources. And we need to have ways to communicate both internally and externally with our families, our community stakeholders, and people within the district. Next slide. This is our strategy map. You've seen this before, but as a refresher, the team identified the goals and developed the strategies to address the priorities. If the district meets the goals by accomplishing the strategies, it will achieve the goal that all students will realize their full potential in life and learning. That is our roadmap. That is a roadmap for the strategic plan, should be the roadmap for the entire district. Next slide, please. Question is out there, why are we doing a strategic plan? We've already got a CSIP. Well, there's a big difference between the two, and I think this is a really good illustration. The colors are matched, and I won't go through the whole thing. I believe you received some information to think about the difference that was in a chart. But to put it this way, just as a rule, the strategic plan is focused on the entire organization, the viability, the growth, the ability of the organization to accomplish its mission and to continue to work to accomplish its mission. CSIP is much narrower in focus. CSIP is focused on student performance. There may be a little overlap in that, the CSIP may look at resources, but resources in terms of student performance rather than resources so that everyone in the district can do their jobs as effectively and efficiently as possible. Next slide, please. So now that we've done kind of the catch-up on what we've accomplished so far and what the strategic plan involves, Ms. Henry is going to walk you through the strategic plan document.
Good evening, Board. I'm Jennifer Henry, the Executive. In front of you, you should have a copy of the draft of the formal document of the strategic plan. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the areas as we go, and then Dr. Bauman will go into more detail in the presentation. This is our first draft, and we'll be making revisions based on the conversation and any input that we have for you. As we get started, we have our introduction message from Dr. Keenan. And as we move through the front section, it really is the about us section to educate people about SSD, what we are about, who we serve, what our mission, vision, values, and priorities are. We have some timelines in here because I don't think a lot of people realize our history and how we were established. We have updated our district map to reflect the recent changes in sub-districts, and that's included as well. And then we have some facts and figures, some data, and the next several pages just to share with our community what our programs and services look like and how many students we serve, locations. Page 16, you'll see that graphic Dr. Bauer just shared. Here's a little bit of a narrative that talks a little more about the difference between the strategic plan and the CSIP, because as he alluded to, there is often a lot of confusion between the two, so hopefully that helps clear that up as people work through the document. And then we just have a graphic. Yeah.
I just recommend that we make sure the governing council gets the same thing next year. I mean, that seems to be a real difficulty in understanding these are two separate, especially what is that.
And that's why we included that in here, because this is our strategic plan document. However, it does combine it with the CSIP because even though they are two separate plans, they support the district overall, and we want people to see what we're doing to support our students and student learning and make sure that they don't miss one or two. For that section, we go into our strategic plan where we talk about the process that we followed and some of the information we discovered in that process, how our progress is going to be reported, and then it has our updated district statement, mission, vision, and core values, and then more detailed graphics about our strategic priorities, and then an acknowledgement page to recognize all the hard work that people put into. Following that, we have our CSIP, which traditionally has a lot of the same information, which is why we combined this document. Is that whole introduction section was in a strategic plan and then in a CSIP. And so there's a lot of duplication. By combining them, we're consistent with our messaging and we keep them together.
And one thing, Jennifer, the CSIP has to follow a certain format because this is what we submit to the state. So we think about CSIP as like connected to, they call it M66, which is the state's way, DESE's way of measuring each district. And so you'll see there's similar pieces, there's some overlap, but we had to adhere to the format and the requirements that the DESE requires of us to submit this. So the good thing is we're able to submit these pieces and to be able to do it in a formal format, but we also can connect it to our.
We go through the overview of the process that was followed to develop the CSIP. And then we go right into the goal areas. Dr. Keenan mentioned we have a certain format that we use. So the following pages have the broken out based on how we submit it to the state. But we will make sure to make it a little bit easier for people to see included. The one thing that's not on these pages are the action steps that will be followed and the progress, and those will be added at a later date in the appendix area as those are developed. We have the acknowledgments page for all of them to help contribute to the CSIP plan. And then we have the appendix, which currently has our org chart and some of our compliance information, but as I mentioned, this section more broad. This is a lengthy document, and we know there's a lot of important information in here, but we know that everybody will have an opportunity or the time to go through all of it. So we also made a one-page document, which you should also have, that has the strategic plan information on one side. It gives it an overview of what those goal areas are, the focus areas, so that people can easily and accessibly get to this information. It's to have either on your bulletin board or in your office. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Bauer and Dr. Bolton to go through some details.
Thank you. So how are we going to implement this strategic plan? The district has adopted a process called strategic and responsive solutions. If there is one word that describes a lot of SSD, that word is inconsistency. We have had different plans, different committees, different groups working on things in different ways. What SRS does is gives the district one approach to do this. It's a clear protocol with a defined process, and it has built into it ways, checks and balances, and reporting methods. And it focuses the team working on that issue to solve the problem. Next slide. Now, as we developed the strategic plan, we used a different methodology than the CSIP plan development was. We used a pretty traditional approach to developing the strategic plan. If you would pick up a book on writing a strategic plan, you would see the approach we used. SRS uses a little different approach, does pretty much the same things, looking at existing data, identifying issues, looking at background information, things like that. But even though the district is using SRS as its methodology for implementing, the strategic plan is stepping into that methodology at the theory of change process, or the start of implementation. So, and from there on, the strategic plan teams will use the SRS methodology. Let me talk a little bit about what a theory of change is. Go to the next slide. Theory of change, to put it real simply, you identify what the issue is, you identify what you're going to do about it, you identify what kind of product you might have, and then you identify what change, what results you see because of this. So we have theories of change developed for each one of the strategy areas on this strategic plan. As going through it, we were able to kind of combine two of the strategies, but they're still working on the same thing. But it's important, again, a systematic, consistent way to go through this that will identify what the teams hope to accomplish and ways to measure that as a result of implementing the plan. Next slide, please. So that's how we're going to implement it. Now let's talk about what we're going to measure. Our first performance measure is a district report card. Think of yourself in school. Think of your own kids when they were in school. They got a report card every four times a year, got progress reports between that. One of the advantages of giving that 4 times a year report card is that if there's a problem after the first quarter, like an F in algebra, speaking from personal experience, you know you got to do something about it. so that hopefully you will see a change. And again, from personal experience, by the time you're done, the F will become a C. So you can identify, by looking at the report card, you see specific things that are going well, things that need to be addressed. Now, the data that will be in the report card is disaggregated by race and gender. Because North Tech is only going to have full-day students for another year, we are not including their data. It would skew it, and then when the North Tech students, when we didn't have data from the full-day students, suddenly a lot of our data would just plummet. So it's cleaner, there are not a lot of students, and it's cleaner for the future planning just to exclude the full-day students and report on students with IEPs. Again, it's a quarterly report, it's timely data, and it is actionable. So if you go to the next slide, these are the kind of things that we're looking at for our district report card. Again, strategic plan, entire district, not just student performance. So transportation, DESE's guideline for a lot of years has been students should not be on the bus more than an hour. So let's measure that. Let's see how many we have on a bus more than an hour. Academics. The IEP drives what we do, so let's report on how students are performing on their IEP goals. Let's report how they're performing on standardized assessments. And let's report on how many are meeting their growth targets. Attendance. DESE requires proportionate attendance, which is what percentage of students are attending school 90% of the time, which is an important measure because you want to get everybody there as much as you can. But also average daily attendance, what percent of students are at school on a given day? And then the least restrictive environment, and I apologize, there's a typo in that first cell. It should be students more than 79% of the time. And then the second cell is students in a regular class 40% to 79% of the time. And those are things that are on our district profile from DESE. So it measures how many students we have in either in regular ed majority of the time or in special ed. Next slide, please. Next comes our balanced scorecard. Balanced scorecard talks about overall district performance. It is balanced because it balances student performance and operational performance. The leading indicators, lagging indicators, it's aligned with district improvement strategies and with the district mission, vision, and values. And again, we're including the data only for students with an IEP. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the balanced scorecard, that's an annual document. We're talking about graduation rates. We're talking about performance on the state assessments. Mr. Andrick talked about IRCs. So the percent of students getting one or more IRC are passing their technology skills assessment. Percent of graduates getting a National Career Readiness Certificate. Graduate placement, what they're doing after high school. Now you see we have two things under graduate placement. The first one is high school, post-high school education or competitively employed. That is our measure with DESE. But the district has long said that doesn't really work for us because we have so many students who aren't going to go to college. We have students who are going to go to a shelter workshop or a day treatment program or stay at home. So, but they all have a planned transition outcome in their IEP. So if we're going to bank on that and say that's what really counts, we should report it. So we will be reporting the percent of graduates who are achieving their planned transition outcome. And then attendance again. Next slide. So those are the academic or student performance related measures. Here are some operational ones. Human resources, vacancies, there are 6 districts in St. Louis County which have been identified as being located in distressed communities. High poverty rates, low employment rates, low education rates, high crime, indicators like that. Those things are also very closely tied to equity. So if we're going to talk about equity, let's measure the results. So let's compare our vacancies in those targeted districts versus vacancies in the rest of the county. Let's look at our workforce demographics. For our finance, let's look at our fund balance. Let's look at the amount of money we're spending to address disproportionality. And let's look at the percent of the budget that is devoted to instruction. Tech support, let's look at the average customer ratings that they give to the tech support. Compliance is a big issue. So let's look at how many districts, when they get, we have three-year cycle of monitoring, how many districts are in full compliance when they get their DESE monitoring. And then the last performance measure is one of 3-year trends. That is, the purpose of that is to measure how the district performs on those indicators over time. It shows trends in student performance, operational performance. For students, it's disaggregated by race and gender. It's an annual report. Next slide, please. So we're looking at many of the same things that would be in the balanced scorecard, but we're looking at them over 3 years. And we should see improvement in each year. So you see the same thing. One difference, stakeholder feedback. What do our parents think of our district? What do the students think of the district? Next slide. Again, transportation, human resources, finance, and technology. Next slide, please. And then finally, compliance and least restrictive environment. Next slide, please. So what do we got to do yet? Well, we want to finalize these performance measures. Be looking for some input from the board if there's something else that they would like measured. Many of these indicators do not have a good data system. For example, planned transition outcomes. We currently don't have a way to measure that across the district. So we have to develop a system and put that into place. And there are a few others too. Prior to implementation, the implementation teams and their leads need to be oriented. Even though we use different methodologies to develop the plans, you will see after Dr. Bolton presents that our CSIP and our strategic plan are very closely aligned. So that communication between those two sets of teams needs to continue. And finally, get it to the governing council and get their okay. Right. Anticipated start on this is July 1st. And are there any questions?
So again, looking at these goals, I'm anticipating there are going to be times when the measures specifically for both the CSIP and the strategic plan are not only going to be closely aligned, they're going to be identical in some situations.
Closely aligned, but not possibly identical. Those that pertain to student performance could be the same.
That's right. So some of the performance measures might even be identical. I would request when they are nearly identical or practically identical, if we could, to save time and effort, if we could just draw the data once and populate it into those. You may already be doing that, but we try to do that we can. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. And now Dr. Bolton has to go back to work.
So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the CSIP plan. And so to your point, Dr. Esser, next year when we report out progress on these pieces, we will be reporting that we will be able to bring that transient information up for publishing. So, next slide. So what I'm going to do is provide you an overview of the proposed CSIP plan, as well as, you know, really draw those connections to the strategic plan so you can see those, and then talk about next steps. First of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about the planning process that we use. And I want to give a big shout out to Carla Reichert, who is our Evaluation and Research Associate. And she was so integral in helping us through this process with the SRS, and really put in a lot of time and effort to make all this happen with the committee. So I really wanted to give a special highlight to her. So this is the process we use. This is the SRS process that Dr. Bauer talked about. And so the areas that we looked at through that is the data review, where we really looked at our SSD data and looked at where were some of our areas of concern. Based on those areas of concern, then we moved into a research review and looked at what does the research say around these specific areas. From there, we also looked at our voice of customer data and reviewed all of the voice of customer data that we had to date, and really looked at some contextual considerations, which we're going to have another slide on this, and then moved in, and from that point, when we looked at those three things, we developed our goal areas. After we developed our goal areas, we then moved into a root cause analysis, in which we used the exercise called the 5 whys. So you ask why this is occurring, and then you keep asking why to dig down into the root cause. From that root cause, then, we were able then to determine what our strategies were going to be under each one of those goal areas. And then we developed that systems frame. That systems frame really helped us identify team members. When we did our systems frame for the strategic plan as well as the CSIP at the same time. Next slide, please. So this is, want to highlight the scope of our review. So we used 31 different data sources from our district, 22 different voice of customer sources that we had, and looked at 57 research studies and resources. Those contextual factors that we talked about, you can see here. Oftentimes when a district is developing a CSIP plan, they are looking at that outcome, that blue area. And that's really where they do a lot of the primary focus. With our focus being on equity, we also brought into the context opportunity and access, and really looked at some of those opportunity and access pieces as well that were very instrumental in helping us create this plan. Next slide, please. Talk to you a little bit about the goals and strategies that were developed. So our goal areas, first of all, are proactively planning for student success, and then looking at our decision-making and making sure that we're providing those supports needed to align to our mission, and then creating learning environments and systems that are very responsive to our students, focusing especially on high-mobility students, their families, and the staff who serve them. So Wendy Pendergrass will be the champion for all of these areas, as these areas do fall under the overarching student achievement area. So as we look at Goal 1, proactively planning for student success, our first strategy is really talking about those post-secondary and program outcomes. Slide. So with that, when we identified that need, we really looked at we are really good at writing compliant transition plans according to the state. We do a really nice job on that. However, when you look at our outcome rates, we're not doing well there. So even though we have good compliance plans, they are not equating to positive post-secondary placement. And so when we look at OSIP standards and we look at DESE standards, we are not meeting that criteria. So what we found was through the research, we found a study that really talked about when we look at just compliance, we tend to get those cookie cutter plans, and it really doesn't prepare our students for post-secondary success. And so what we know is about a third of our students outcomes are unknown, and you saw some of that data in Kevin's presentation. Next slide, please. So what our focus is really going to be is, and I alluded to this previously, where we are actually going to define for SSD what is a positive post-secondary outcome for our students, in addition to those other standards. Also looking at student-centered plans and futures planning. So looking at some different facilitation tools, such as charting the life course, and really utilizing a lot of those high-quality tools to really help plan for our students post-secondary. Starting that transition planning early, elementary school, middle school, we should be thinking about what is post-secondary going to look like for these students. And then working to improve our post-graduation follow-up response rate. So, really trying to find out where each one of our students are and what they are doing after graduation. So this currently is a CSIP plan right now. It's our 1.2, which works on transition with self-determination. And so we'll be morphing this team into CSIP strategy 1.1. Our lead for this will be Dr. Tammy Yates, who is our Assistant Executive Director of Partner Districts. And then also her co-lead will be Casey Winsome, who is the Director of Transition. You can see what I've listed here from our grid of who we were looking at members. We have names, but names aren't going to mean a whole lot to you. So what I did was I added their roles. So you can see the representation of the different roles that are going to sit on the strategy team. Ongoing members means that they will be a part of the team doing monthly meetings or more frequently if the team needs to meet more frequently. Members to consult are those members who might come in on an ad hoc basis, depending on the topics that will be discussed and determined. Next slide, please. Our next strategy, CSIP strategy 1.2, is really looking at the connections between student data and what the research says that students need to for high student achievement and proactive planning. Review of research on this really talked about where we looked at student outcomes needing to improve, and definitely looking at that proficiency rate and how that impacts their long-term outcomes. And so we want to be able to proactively plan around these influencing indicators that are going to impact our students' success. So we feel that being more proactive around that and developing a data monitoring system where we can be monitoring that data frequently and then partnering with our partner districts to recognize those indicators and make sure we're on the right track for our students. Our focus for this will be making connections between those factors and those successful outcomes for students and what kind of data do we need. And then once we have that data, utilizing that data proactively to then plan for our students. And then having those database conversations with our partner districts. Our lead for that will be Alan Beach. And you can see that ongoing members to consult. And we also have on this one members to keep informed. So these are some folks that, based on the information gathered by this team, that we need to keep these folks informed as we're moving forward, as there might be opportunities for them to partner with us in these areas. Next, please. Then we have 1.3, which gets to the collaboration and partnerships. And so 1.2 and 1.3 are very closely aligned. So once we figure out that we have those indicators, we're collecting that data, we want to work with our partner districts to really then plan proactively with that data. Next slide, please. So as we looked at some of the research, we know general education staff in partnership with special education can really create preventative mechanisms for our kids and help them be successful. And so we really want to look into ways to work towards that goal. And so currently we're having conversations with partner districts. They really tend to be focused on, so you're going to do this and we're going to do this, instead of how can we collaborate together to support our students. And so this team, next slide, will be led by Chiquita McRiddle. Did we lose that slide? what's next? Sorry, I've jumped ahead. Sorry. They're going to focus on, go back one, I'm sorry. They're going to focus on productively collaborating planning practices with the partner districts as well as that integrated data system. Next slide. Now, our lead for that will be Ms. Chiquita McRiddle, who is the Executive Director of Partner District. And you can see we will have ongoing members to support, and members to keep informed as well for this one. Next slide, please. Then we move on to Goal 2. Goal 2, Strategy 2.1, will be looking at developing a shared understanding of purpose that provides clarity for programming and decisions across teams. And so really what we're looking at here is a philosophy goal. Developing a philosophy for looking at how we look at programming decisions across the county and looking at that district-wide. Next slide, please. So as we look at through an equity lens, some of our services across the county are not necessarily equitable. And so really want to look at developing that consistency for the access and opportunities for our students across partner districts. You can see we used a lot of our evaluation data and our engagement survey data to help us look at some of these issues. Next slide, please. So the things this team will be working on is really developing that common set of intentions for the district, and then ensuring that the type and level of support aligns with what we've identified as those intentions. And then facilitating that collaboration and coordination across service providers, so we're not providing services in silos, but we're looking at it from a more integrated approach. Next slide, please. So our lead on that will be Dr. Kelly Grigsby, who is the Executive Director of our SSD school. You can also see our ongoing members, our members to consult, as well as our members to keep informed. Our next strategy is 2.2, and this is ensuring that programming decision-makings are grounded in that evidence-based practices, which we alluded to previously in the literacy presentation. Next slide, please. So when we look at moving to our centralized purchasing and our research-based practices selection framework, as well as our program guide, for example, the one that you saw in the literacy presentation, those are things that we want to make sure that our districts have access to. So when we're looking at programs and we're looking at strategies, we want to be using the best ones out there for our students. Next slide, please. So the things we'll be looking for here is establishing those common data sources to enable that decision-making, as well as which of our practices are evidence and research-based, and promoting those practices. This builds off our current CSIP team for 1.1, which is already in existence. Next slide, please. So I will be the lead for that one, because of fidelity is my favorite word, right? And we've had some ongoing members and members to consult there as well. Next slide. Our last goal area is Goal 3, and this one's really going to focus on student mobility. So really looking, I always tell everyone, SSD, it could be the great equalizer in that area. Because we service the whole county, as long as a student moves anywhere in our county, we should be able to pick up where they left off at their previous school and keep moving, instead of having to stop, reassess, figure out this kid, and that delays in the moving forward. And so this goal really looks to that. Next slide. When we look at our research, approximately 1/3 of our districts have more than 20% of their student body experiencing relocation in a single calendar year. That's pretty high. And so we know when that happens, that's going to affect graduation rates, that's going to affect achievement rates and post-secondary outcomes. And we often see in those same districts, we have a higher proportion of students attending our most restrictive placement in our FSC schools. So we did it.
Question. We had talked a half hour before, about, the equity things, and one of them was keeping the same teacher.
Yeah.
The same. Is there a possibility that if an individual moves and the individual is not moved that far, that they could keep the same parent?
Yeah.
No, is it possible? I mean, because that would be, I'm not saying, I don't know what that would entail.
Yeah, I think that would be, when you have 20% of our, that's not really, think about it in terms of students, absolutely, that would make sense. But our students, are assigned to the school.
I'm not disagreeing there. I'm just saying that, don't we need to integrate this in to our rubric when we're talking about same teacher throughout the 80% of the time and 90% of the time? Because if we're saying 20% move, and they're gonna get different teachers, they're gonna get different pairs regardless.
Right.
We're gonna get taken on that
But I
equity
think
score.
where we can look at the equity piece is, are we able to then pick up their instruction from right where they left off?
I'm not doubting that, but that's not what we're measuring. You're not, I mean, that's a great idea.
We're actually measuring students who have the same teacher, not the students who are moving. We're measuring, if I'm your teacher and if I leave mid-year, how many of the students am I working with?
You got a secondary measure on that, so that does that individual have the same teacher? I believe when I look at.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, you measure
We're looking at that as.
you measure two factors on that.
Yeah.
I agree with you, that's what that's saying, I agree you should be able to pick up, but that's not what you're measuring, and that's not what that score is.
Sure.
So if you keep that same score, and you have a 20% failure rate, according to what that is, you're never gonna hit that 90 and 80%, because you already lost. So we might need to revise those measures,
Sure. We can look into that.
otherwise we're gonna lose. Sorry, it's just your numbers didn't seem to get, hey, I had a stroke, I sometimes get confused.
So,
I'm losing it, I'm just not.
all right, so really just looking at that mobility rate being a huge factor, that impacts negatively on our achievement rate. Next slide, please. So some focus areas here is really kind of looking at those patterns of school changes among those students, and that would kind of, get to the point that you're talking about. Are they moving close? Are they moving far away? And then looking at the experience of students who have a high mobility rate, as well as the staff that supports them, and gaining some information from both of those areas. Working with our partner districts then to really look at solutions to build systems around that network, so that we can have those consistent supports for the students who might be experiencing those changes. So this will be led by Kevin Ander, and you can see our ongoing members as well as our members to consult there. Slide. So I'd like to make some connections to the strategic plan. So here, this chart provides an overview. You can see in blue, those are our 3 CSIP goals. In green is our 3 strategic plan goals. And then the strategies that are underneath each of those. So you can kind of see the comparison there. So we're proactively planning for student success. We're looking at those decision-making processes and making sure student supports are in place, and then looking at that mobility. And that plays right into our systems, our resources, and then that relational communication. So hopefully you can see those parallels illustrated here. Next slide, please. This is our teams to consult, and as Dr. Bauer alluded to previously, we're definitely going to have to develop systems so that our teams are in constant communication. So we put this grid together, and what you'll see there, the down slide, you have the strategic team interconnections, and across you have CSIP. Where you see a yellow square, those teams should be collaborating together and communicating together, because the impact that they're going to have, we don't want it working in silos, we want it to be woven together. So this chart will really help us in making sure we're communicating with those teams on an ongoing basis. We are also going to, on our standard agenda that we'll be using for both teams, have an area where they talk about So what is this strategy team or what is this CSIP team doing that's impacting our work, and how are we communicating with them? And then they also do quarterly check-ins with the DLT to ensure things are on the right track for progress, as well as that'll be another checkpoint for us to make sure that that intercommunication is happening. So then when we look at the strategy team resources that we're going to be provided, we will be using that project protocol. We will also, there are not only the templates online, but there are also short videos that explain each one of the worksheets that they'll be working through to help support their work. And they will be communicating with the DLT at strategic points in their work to ensure that progress is occurring, but as well as we have that leadership support. So really quickly, I was going to do this activity, but actually in light of time, I will leave it up to you guys whether we do this activity, because I don't know if you brought your pajamas tonight. So one thing, though, I would like for you to think about is if you have good ideas on how we can create those strong connections across those teams. We did this activity with both our CSIP and strategy and strategic plan teams and came up with some really good ideas about how to keep those connections strong. But if you do have ideas, I would just ask that you share them with us so that we can take those back to the team. Next slide, please. It's going to be a really fun activity. Our next step. So as you can see here, this is on the right-hand side there, you'll see these are the things that we have completed on the SRS process. We have done a welcome email to all of our team members, and each team member does have access to a Microsoft Teams site, which is where we will house all of our documents. The next step is that those newly formed strategy teams will be meeting to look at our theory of change. We did, in both cases, frame out some theory of change. However, wanted the buy-in and the expertise of those members that are a part of the strategy teams to help us continue that theory of change, because then that will equate into our action steps, which, as Ms. Henry said, will be included in our appendices once those are developed. So that's kind of our next work that we'll be moving forward with.
So you're going to keep all this on a Microsoft Teams?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what we currently do now, and it's worked out pretty well.
Would it be possible then? Is there a password to get onto that Microsoft?
Actually, I think you guys would all have access to
Yeah, that's
that.
what I was
We could
wondering.
just add you as
If we
members.
wanted
We
to-
could add you as members, absolutely, if you'd like that.
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll make a note of that, thank you. Next slide, please. So this is that theory of change. So as you can see, a lot of these are pretty well filled out, but we want to finish it, so that the team has those inputs. We're hoping to have that completed by July 1. So July 1, we can actually start the actual work. Next slide, please. So, I forgot, we have fly-ins here. So you can see these things at the bottom. Those are indicating the what on the theory of change. Click. And then our far column is the why, our outcome. Next click. And then we have the who, which are our stakeholders that we've listed in there. And also that would be team members in there as well. That's the final one. Nope. Milestones will come. The milestones will actually be our action plan. And the performance measures, so how we're going to measure that. And again, we may have some performance measures that overlap, and we will make sure we report those together. All right, and this is the SRS process in its complete form. So you can see the circle of where we are right now as we're working on that theory of change, and our team through the next 4 to 5 years, will be working through that. Any further questions that you might have? Got one more to go, but it's not me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, last on our list, 2.05, the update on the COVID mitigation plan.
Nice being had.
last is adjourned, right?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
All in favor?
Okay, everybody take 5 minutes.
Yeah.